Okay, we should be live. Let's see. So we are streaming in AV1. Hold on, let me see. This week in tech news. Let me just put this. Let me put the tag. AV1. Just gonna put the tag on the title here. AV1. This is an AV1 stream. The way OBS handles AV1 is a little bit weird because it always sends. If there's not a lot of activity going on, it doesn't actually show the bandwidth, or it doesn't actually use a lot of bandwidth. I'm only streaming at 1300 kilobits right now, even though I've set the maximum to go all the way up to 2500, or no, 25,000, but I'm only using 1300. So that's kind of weird. Well, I don't need a whole lot for this stream, so let me see. I want to do a little bit of a test here before we get started here and going into the articles. Hey, RK. It's been a while. So we're going to talk about a lot of tech stuff in the second half of the stream. I don't know if I'm going to do that in the first half of the stream or if I'm going to do that in the second half of the stream. I am streaming in AV1 right now, so I updated the video title to include AV1. We're using only 1300 kilobits right now. I want to see what happens if I switch this over to a game, though. Like, what happens if I... How much bandwidth does it use? Oh, wow, it jumps up. It goes way up. Okay. That's weird. So it's almost like OBS does not adhere to constant bitrate when you're streaming with AV1, because when I'm not doing anything, the bitrate dynamically goes down. It's almost like I'm streaming in variable bitrate, which is really weird. That's how it used to work like a decade ago. But anyway, so we may just bring this back up here. We may do the tech part of this, the tech news, in the first half. It kind of depends on what the audience wants to do. One thing I do want to talk about on this stream, though, is the Game Awards, because we have talked about Game of the Year time and time again on several live streams throughout the course of basically since Hogwarts Legacy came out back in February of this year. And here we are in November, and we're about to get into that holiday season where it's back-to-back holiday, and then it's the end of the year. So I do want to cover Game of the Year because I do think that is something that there has been a lot of discussion on that. And a lot of other, I guess, streamer personalities have given their opinion on this topic. So I do want to include my own because I do think I have a unique perspective on that. I'm not too heavily focused on video games. I think this channel definitely, though the channel it has games in the name, Game Tech Reviews, I think we focus primarily on technology, and we leverage video games as a way to benchmark and measure the tech products that are oftentimes promoted on this channel. So those being, PC DIY, GPUs, CPUs, etc., RAM, power supplies, you name it. Hey Gershon, how are you doing? So here, let's do this. I know I have this article on here. I don't know. Do you guys want to do the tech articles first, or do you want to do the game voting, the Game Awards voting? It's like voting for the Oscars, sort of. Tech first. Okay, we'll do that. All right. So let me change this over here real quick. Mute this thing because I have this. Actually, here, let me send this out of the way. Just so you guys can see what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to get these guys reassigned here. Speaking of gaming, we have one of the games that will be listed in one of those articles here. So let me move these out of the way. Then we'll bring this up again. Get this out of the way. Mute this so you guys don't hear all this background noise. Okay. Okay. So, I guess the first article we can go through is... So there's a lot of weird stuff, geopolitical stuff has been happening, as you guys know. Unless you're completely oblivious to what's going on in the Middle East right now. There's kind of a terrible situation across the board, but then now we have China. So the Chinese leader has visited the US and there was a meeting. And what's really weird is, despite that meeting, there are even more. There are even more NVIDIA GPUs added to the China ban list. So, really weird. So this came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting to see this article. But we'll talk about this. Oh, the 7900 XTX is... You've seen it pull 475 watts. Yeah, it can pull that much when pushed. Mine, so if you want to run it at stock power, just set it to the secondary BIOS. The secondary BIOS is the AMD spec. That's how I run mine. And that one kind of caps it to 350 watts. That is if you want it to use less power. So, as the title reads here, US adds even more NVIDIA GPUs to the ban list. So the RTX 6000 Ada, which I actually thought this GPU was originally on the first ban list. I'm surprised to see that this one's only now being added. I thought it was actually already banned. And then now they're adding RTX 6000, A6000, for those that don't know. This is the RTX 3090 Ti. And then, I don't know what L4 is. The A6000 and the L4. So the A6000 is the Ampere flagship, but it is meant for the professional market, so it's the workstation equivalent. I don't like that NVIDIA got rid of the Quadro name. I really think they should have kept the Quadro brand because it does make it a lot easier to talk about their professional GPUs compared to their consumer GPUs. Now that they don't have the Quadro name, it's really confusing because it's all just RTX. So you have RTX 6000. So and in the case with Ampere and Ada, because the letter A is, you know, in both generations, you have to differentiate between RTX A6000, which is an Ampere GPU, like a 3090 Ti, and then RTX 6000 Ada. I don't like this naming convention. I wish that they would have made it better. So for once, NVIDIA's naming convention is actually not good compared to the competition. I think it's much easier to differentiate AMD's GPUs in the professional market because it's literally just W7000 series. So W meaning workstation, which is basically professional. So the U.S. government continues to widen the ban list for GPU exports to China and has now added more NVIDIA chips to the list. So I thought these were already on the list. I'm surprised that they're not, but now they are. So, you know, whatever. It's just basically in line with what I originally figured would be the case. And then as a result of that, the 4090 is now being added to the list, which originally people were saying that it was on the list, but then they took it off the list. Now it's going back on the ban list. So what that means for the regular consumers that are not in the Chinese region, I mean, it does affect the people in the Chinese region as well, more so, but in general, for those that are that think that they're not going to be affected by this because they don't live in China, that's actually not the case. That couldn't be further from the truth. What this means is that the 4090 is going to be harder to get because they're basically what they're doing is they have shipped a lot of 4090s into China to try to like get as many in the door before they're banned officially. So anything that was supposed to be going to different regions may have gotten redirected to the Chinese region so that they can be sold in that market, because once the cutoff applies, you know, no more stock is going to be sent into the region due to the export ban, or I guess the import ban, or whatever it is. It's an export ban for NVIDIA sending stuff to China. So that's going to create a shortage elsewhere. It's going to increase supply artificially in China, and then once that dries up, then there'll be a big problem over there with a shortage. But what that means is for everybody else, there's going to be a shortage initially that's going to crop up starting around, like now. And that's going to last, who knows, maybe into, I would guess, sometime toward the end of Q1. I'm expecting this to not be a problem anymore. What that means is that the 4090 is going to be very hard to get this holiday season, and probably in January and maybe even throughout February, it could be hard to get one of these. There's not a lot of them in stock. If you try to look up RTX 4090 right now, you're not going to find a whole lot of them. Like if we go, for instance, to, let's just go to Newegg, Newegg.com. I like to check Newegg because it seems to be the most up-to-date in terms of inventory. And if you look here, check this out. This is Newegg. Newegg already, look at the price of RTX 4090. And this is shipping from the US. Now, these are all third-party sellers, which means Newegg already doesn't have that many available. In fact, this one right here from Zotac, everybody's favorite brand, Zotac, it looks like they're the only ones that are still in stock, shipped and sold by Newegg. All these other ones, this Gigabyte one, that's GH Electronics, that's a third party. So that's basically a scalper. And then you've got somebody scalping RTX 4090 from Best Buy. They're trying to resell them here. So you can see it's happening already. See, it's happening already. Already, we are seeing the effects of, there's an MSI one for $2,000, water-cooled. This one's still available. But, that's because not everybody wants a liquid-cooled 4090. So that one's going to sit on the shelf longer. And it's also $2,000, which is not exactly the most affordable 4090. So you can already see it happening. It's unfortunate. So it's kind of going back to the way things were. At least at the 4090 tier, things are going back to the way they were during the pandemic with the supply shortages because of what's going on with the US and China. Basically, the US government banning the sale of 4090s in China has resulted in a lot of the 4090 stock that was supposed to be sold elsewhere in the world to be quickly crammed into the Chinese market as soon as possible, and here we are. Now we're back in this situation again. Now, let's check RTX 4080. RTX 4080, this is a relatively slow seller. This is one of NVIDIA's slower selling GPUs because it's very expensive, and it is basically not giving you a whole lot in terms of hardware, in terms of video memory for the price. It's not really that competitive. Other than ray tracing, other than energy efficiency, it's really not offering good value. And that's the reason why there are still a lot of these available. But I do think that with the 4090 now artificially removed from the global market, at least temporarily for the next 3 or 4 months, the 4080 is going to be the one that a lot of people are going to settle on if they want a high-end GPU. So this is the reality. If we look at AMD's card here, RX 7900 XTX. So these are actually, looking, okay, some of these are the XT. So this one that's $799, that's an XT. But you can see the AMD cards are actually, the price points are staying relatively, it's like under $1,000. For most of them, not all of them. You can see some of these are over $1,000, like the Sapphire Nitro is at $1,029. The Asus TUF is at $1,079. And then the other thing too is AMD now has another bundle. So now if you purchase an AMD GPU, at least a 7000 series GPU or a Ryzen 7000 CPU, you get Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. So just like with what they were doing with Starfield, now they have switched the game offering to Frontiers of Pandora. So yeah, I think these are offering pretty good value. You're getting that game. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the Avatar series. I haven't actually seen the latest movie. But I guess the game looks like it's going to be really graphically intensive. But we'll see. It's coming out in a few weeks. So if you are interested in that game and you need a new GPU upgrade, this could be a promising option. Let's look at the lower end GPUs. So let's look at RTX 4060 Ti. 4060 Ti is at $399. So it's basically holding steady at its price here, $399. Actually, some of them are going for more than that, so $449. So this is probably going to stay where it is. There's no reason to change the price on these, regardless of what people say. I've been hearing, depending on some of the tech tuber channels that you listen to, I've been hearing that NVIDIA is going to adjust the prices, and then other people are saying that they're not going to do that. I am more inclined to agree with the latter. Another interesting thing that I listened to the other day. So Moore's Law is Dead. His Broken Silicon podcast featured Brian from Tech Yes City, and Tech Yes City and him were talking about kind of the pricing on the GPUs, and they were talking about the 4080, and Moore's Law is Dead was kind of saying that the AMD cards were selling better than the 4080, and Tech Yes City was saying the opposite, that from what he's noticed, the 4080 is selling better than the XTX. I actually would agree with Tech Yes City. From my own personal observations, I do believe that the 4080, despite what people say that it's bad value, I do strongly believe, and there is a lot of evidence to back this up, that the 4080, despite what the tech press says, it is actually still far outselling any of AMD's flagship GPUs. I don't know now by how much it's selling. I don't know. I don't know if it's like a 2-to-1 ratio or a 4-to-1 ratio or a 1.2 ratio, something along those lines. I don't really know. Manu 1137 just subscribed to the channel. So hey Manu, if you're in the chat, feel free to send a message if you have any questions. Well, welcome to the channel. But I still think, no matter what people are saying about 40 series is selling just fine. Like, I don't think there's any problem. Now, I guess if you compare the sales, the success of the 40 series versus the 30 series, then yes. Then I do think if you directly compare RTX 40 to RTX 30, they're not selling as well from that perspective. But in general, I think that the 40 series is doing just fine. I think that most people that are considering a 4060 or a 4060 Ti are far more likely to get that without even looking at AMD or even Intel's Arc A770. So I think that's just kind of the reality. And yeah, regardless of what they do in January, there's a lot of rumors with the RTX Super Series. I think there was one article saying that it was imminent, that it was going to launch. Somewhere in here there was an article from either Video Cards or something. But yeah, regardless of what happens with the Super Series, that's basically going to be a refresh to the 40 series, which NVIDIA can do that, and it could be that they want the GPUs to sell more, but they're not selling as many as they'd like. So they're going to try to reinvigorate or drive more hype and demand for 40 series by remarketing it as Super Series, kind of like what they did with Turing, because Turing was not that successful in the same lens when you compare Turing to Pascal. So RTX 20 series compared to GTX 10 series. The 10 series far outsold the 20 series, despite the fact that the 20 series debuted with ray tracing. People still did not buy it nearly as much as they did the 10 series. So I think we're kind of in a similar situation here, where the 30 series was a great seller, the 40 series not so much in comparison, but overall, in the broad scope of things, especially when you compare 40 series with the competitors like AMD's 7000 series, for example, or Intel's GPU offerings, which is basically not really something that the average gamer would even consider, to be honest. Nvidia's doing just fine. So I agree with Tech Yes City in that regard. I think that Nvidia is going to continue to maintain their position regardless of what the competition plans to do going into next year. And it's going to take some kind of massive screw up at Nvidia, or some business decision at the executive level where they just want to go all in on AI and just kind of forsake some of the GPU market and just try to maintain that without any kind of refresh going into 2025, which I highly doubt that to be the case. But I'm just saying, hypothetically, the only way that Nvidia could give up market share is either one of two things have to happen. Either they have to just neglect the gaming market and just go all in on AI, which I don't think they're going to do, but that is something that they could lose market share if they were to do that. And the other thing is if they had some terrible recall issue with their latest GPUs, something like that could affect them in a negative way. Because that affected them in the past, with the fire, like the Apple computers catching fire, or the GPUs just dying prematurely. And that hurt Apple's brand image. And that is the reason why Apple does not do business with Nvidia anymore, at least when they sell their consumer devices. So something like that could cause a massive shift. But even if something like that were to happen, I don't think it'd be a massive shift. So anyway, that's why you guys can't find RTX 4090s anymore at decent prices. Or I guess at MSRP. So that's basically it. Another article here is kind of piggybacking off of that previous article. So the AMD Radeon 7900 XTX GPUs witness a price surge in China. And this is kind of weird. I don't really know why that would happen in China. As NVIDIA RTX 4090 gets banned. I think I know why. So that's why. So basically, what's happening here is it's hard to buy a 4090 in China because it's literally banned. So what do you do when you can't buy a 4090? Well, you buy the next best thing. So that would be the XTX. And someone might add, well, what about the 4080? Well, the reason why the 4080 is not going to be considered the next best thing is because of the difference in the video memory. A lot of people that are buying the 4090 are using it for generative AI. And they're training these AI models using the 4090, and they're benefiting, or they're able to do that relatively easily, or efficiently, I should say, because of the 24 gigabytes of video memory that the 4090 offers. The 4080 only offers 16. So, and if you want to train a large language model like ChatGPT or some kind of GPT or whatever, realistically, you need more than 24. You need like 33 to 36. So realistically, you would need an RTX, an Ada 6000 with 48 gigabytes, or an A6000 with 48 gigabytes, or an AMD W7900, which also has 48 gigabytes. So, but those are very expensive professional GPUs. There are not a lot of them. It's not easy to get them. So what do? You go down to the consumer market and you get a 24 gigabyte GPU. Now, if the 4090 gets banned, you're still going to want a 24 gigabyte GPU. Well, guess what? The 7900 XTX offers 24 gigabytes of video memory. That's why it is the next best choice. And now that AMD is moving along with ROCm on Linux and they're slowly migrating it out to Windows, it's only a matter of time before there's some level of feature parity with like image generation and that sort of thing, where it's going to catch up and it's just basically going to be on par with NVIDIA. And I've done my own test with ROCm on Linux for generative AI, and I've also done it on Windows using Microsoft's DirectML earlier this summer, and AMD works fine. If you have the VRAM, it's going to work fine. So that's the reason why this is happening in China specifically. So let me see what it says down here. I haven't read the article, but I'm pretty sure what I just said is the reason why. It also has to do with price. So the price, it says right here, based on a report from My Drivers, the GeForce RTX 4090 is now being retailed between around 20,000 yuan, as channels are able to acquire at around 15,000 to 17,000. So that's the price bracket. Now, I don't know what this is in US dollars, but it's basically overpriced. This is a tremendous increase since the initial MSRP of the flagship was around. Okay, so basically 13,000 is around 1,600 or so US dollars. So think about that. We're going from like 13,000 to 20,000. So yeah, that's a massive increase in price. So that's pushing this into professional GPU prices. So with the shortage of a highly demanding product, competitors have stepped in to fill the gap. So basically AMD's card, here we go. See what I just said earlier, is now being seen as an alternative, as it also packs 24, there you go, 24 gigabytes of VRAM, which is great for professionals and content creators. That's true, but I was thinking more around the AI thing. The export restriction could prove to be a blessing in disguise for Team Red, since it now gives them the opportunity to make their market offering more compelling. Okay, so yeah, I don't expect there to be a problem acquiring a 7900 XTX outside of China. These could sell out in China, though, because if the 4090 is not available, and this is the next best thing because of the VRAM, then these aren't going to last that long either. So yeah, we could be looking at another shortage for this. I don't really know if this would affect like the US market though. Just kind of, or even in general, like I don't think other markets will be affected. If someone wants to buy a Radeon card, I don't think they'll have a problem doing so. I haven't noticed any shortages. If you check AMD.com, they always show that they're in stock, so that's a good indicator that there's good amounts of supply for these GPUs. Okay, so that's basically the GPU news. Let me see if I had anything else to say on that. Oh, here's a picture of a never-released RTX 4090 Ti, aka Titan AI Ada, aka never-released quad-slot GPU. So I think we showed images of this earlier this year. It was leaked. This is one of those GPUs. It looks like it actually does exist, though, with this prototype here. So you can see, yeah, it really does exist. Whether or not this is a real, like, if this was actually meant to be mass-produced, that remains to be seen, or if it was just a prototype. It's interesting, though. You can see that they have a fan. There's actually a third fan in the middle. I didn't know that there was a third fan. This is the first time I've seen this particular image where it almost reminds me of the Gigabyte graphics cards that have the fan in the middle that's kind of offset from the fans on the left and the right side because it overlaps essentially. So what's funny about this is you have a fan here on the top of the card, you have one in the middle, and then you have one on the bottom of the graphics card over here at the back. So that's actually really, really interesting that they actually designed it like that. And this is the real deal. This is not some fake image. They actually plan to build this. They might even actually sell this next year in limited quantities, just like they did the 3090 Ti back a year ago. Hey, EGM. What's going on? So we're going through the tech news, then we're going to go on, the second part of this stream, which I think we're going to devote more of the time to, because there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff in technology news right now. We're going to be going over the video game awards for 2023. So if you're interested in that, hearing my opinion on the different categories and the different nominees, you're probably going to want to stay tuned for that, because I think that's going to be an interesting discussion. Considering the fact that there have been multiple streams that I've done where we've talked about contenders for Game of the Year throughout the course of this year. Is there any RAM with 8000 speed for AMD Expo currently using 64? Not officially, but you can use XMP 8000 on Ryzen. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Like, what I would do is check the QVL. If the XMP is on the QVL, it'll be fine. I've actually considered getting a 8000 kit, a 48 gigabyte XMP GSkill Trident Z for testing with at 8000 on Ryzen. I just couldn't bring myself to spend the money on it right now, because I've been kind of waiting to see what happens with Threadripper. If Threadripper ends up being like way too much money though, then then we'll see what happens. But yeah, and I can even show you what RAM I'm referring to. So GSkill DDR5 Trident Z Z5 48 gigabyte 8000 megahertz. This RAM right here. This is the RAM that I was thinking of getting to run at 8000 on my 7950X or my 7950X 3D. And the one thing about it, the reason why I really like the GSkill RAM is because this RAM can run at 8000 megahertz at 1.35 volts. This is the reason why. Because I don't want to have to run 8000 at 1.4 or 1.43 or 1.45. I don't want to do that, because that means that the RAM is going to run hotter, and it means that you're going to have more variables to test for in terms of stability testing, because now you have to constantly monitor your RAM temperatures. So if this RAM can run at 8000 on 1.35 volts, that means you don't need active cooling or anything like that. And I can tell you guys right now, the RAM that I'm currently running is, here, let me duplicate this tab. It is GSkill Trident Z5 96 gigabyte 6400 megahertz. So, well, they don't have it, which is unfortunate. They did. Actually, hold up. Maybe they're... What is right here? No, that's eBay. Hold on. How do they not have this? All right, well, let's go back here. GSkill DDR5 48 per module. Let's go. There it is. This RAM. 6400, 96 gigabytes, 32, 39. Yeah, this is it. Okay, so this is the RAM that I'm currently running in the PC that I'm streaming on right now. And I'm literally running it. It's all 96 gigabytes, so 2x 48 at 6400 on a Ryzen 9 7950X. So, and this is XMP memory. So that's the reason why I wouldn't worry about Expo or XMP. Now, they always recommend... Now, let me put it this way. If given the choice, if there was an Expo version of this exact same RAM kit, yes, I would recommend choosing the Expo RAM for a Ryzen system over an XMP kit. But if there is not an Expo, in the case there is not Expo for this particular kit, just go ahead and buy the XMP and it'll work fine. The thing is, you have to remember that Expo never existed prior to DDR5. So every single AM4 Ryzen desktop today, all those like those 5800X 3D systems, the 5950X, the 3600, the 3950X, etc. All the old AMD AM4 CPUs, are all equipped. Almost all of them, pretty much, unless they're just running JEDEC speeds, they're all running Intel XMP-based memory profiles. So there's nothing wrong with running an XMP kit on a Ryzen 7000 system. I mean, I'm a prime example. I can tell you right now, the system that I'm running, I'm using XMP memory. This kit right here. The other system, so basically, 7950X is using this RAM just fine using XMP profile. Also, 7950X 3D is using the exact same kit of this 96 gigabytes. So I got 96 gigabytes in this system and 96 gigabytes in this system. So if I wanted to take out, if I wanted to basically put the RAM from one of these CPUs into the other one, I could literally, if I wanted to, I could run 192 gigabytes of RAM at 4800. So just keep that in mind. So to answer your question, I would just get this. I actually planned to buy this RAM a month ago and do a whole video series on like 8000 speed on AMD, just to kind of show people that that's the magic ratio. But it doesn't really benefit you. So it's kind of like not really that much better. Do you need that much memory for a streaming machine? No, but you do for other things. Not for just streaming, you don't need 96 gigabytes. Like this 48 gigabytes is more than enough. But if you wanted to stream games simultaneously, and I guess outside of that, if you wanted to do video editing, if you're editing 4K footage, like 4K, either RED or just whatever, RAW or, like MP4 or whatever, like compressed video, like it can use a lot of memory in like DaVinci Resolve or that sort of thing. So that's the reason why. Nero is asking if it's fully stable. Wait, hold on. The chat, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't see in the chat. Hold on. Is there any RAM? Okay. Nice RAM, 48 gigs should be enough if I only play games. Yeah, this should be enough. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing that I'd recommend. A lot of people say 32 gigabytes is good enough. That is true. Some people even go so far as to say 16 gigabytes is enough. I disagree. I'm of the opinion that in 2023, and remember guys, it's about to become 2024 in less than 2 months. So let's just talk from 2024's perspective. In 2024, I am of the opinion that if I'm going to build a new system with all new parts like DDR5, etc., 32 gigabytes is the absolute minimum spec. Minimum spec that I would do. I would not recommend. So what that means is if I'm building a PC and it's very cost conscious, meaning there's not a lot of budget, like if you're trying to build, say, a $700 PC or a $900 PC or something that's under $1,000 for the entire build, that includes the keyboard, the mouse, all the stuff that no one ever talks about when they're building a PC, I would only consider 32 gigabytes as the minimum spec in terms of the memory. I would not go lower than 32 gigabytes. So this is the reason why if I was going to get an 8,000 megahertz kit, 32 would be the minimum, but you guys know me, I don't like to settle for the minimum. And that's the reason why this 48 gigabytes is above the minimum to the point where I would be okay with running a system that has 48 gigabytes at 8,000 on a Ryzen or an Intel system. Now, that brings us to a comment that was mentioned earlier. I want to bring that up. Nero said 8,000 RAM doesn't even run well on Intel. Yes, this is what I wanted to say. So running 8,000 on Intel is very hit or miss because it's very hard for you to tell if your system is 100% stable, because Intel doesn't do a good job of telling you outright that everything is not okay. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means is that if somebody puts this memory on screen with a 13900K or any equivalent CPU, it could even be 14th gen at this point, it may work or it may not work. And you may not know that it's not stable until like 2 days later when you try to boot into Windows and it doesn't get into Windows because your operating system has some corrupted registry entries and you have to reinstall Windows. That actually happened to me when I was trying to run 128 gigabytes of RAM on my 13900K at 5600 megahertz. I have a whole video talking about this. So I don't really trust high-speed RAM on Intel. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I will say that your mileage may vary, and you want to stress test a lot, not just memtest, because memtest 86 might pass. You run that thing for 24 hours and it might be fine. Then you go and fire up Forspoken, and the game literally crashes like 10 minutes in, and it's because your memory's not stable. So, you know, those are the sort of things you want to do. You want to do a lot of mixed workload testing if you're testing for stability, especially on Intel. Intel more so than AMD, because the thing I like about AMD when it comes to testing RAM, a lot of people are like, oh, well, AMD can't do high-speed memory like Intel. Well, the thing is, yes, it can. It just took a while for it to get there with the BIOS updates. The thing about AMD is if AMD can hit a high speed, it can be pretty consistent in terms of its stability if it can do that speed. If it can't do that speed, it's not going to give you the headache of corrupting your operating system after the fact. It's not going to pretend to be stable. If it can't do it, it's going to tell you, hey, I can't do it. You slow it down. It's too fast. Slow it down. I can't do it. It's going to tell you straight up. So I like that because it saves a lot of time trying to figure out if your memory's stable or if there's some kind of PC problem, what's going on. You have to start troubleshooting all these different parts. So AMD will at least let you know there's... Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, many Intel QVLs are done using one stick of 8,000, not even two. Yeah, you definitely want to check your motherboard QVL list if you want to do high-speed RAM. Does 8,064 gigabyte even exist? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So basically, this RAM kit that I'm showing you guys, this is the highest density that exists today for 8,000. So this is the only kit of RAM that I would actually personally buy if I was going to run an 8,000 kit without trying to buy like some cheaper kit and trying to overclock that. You know, this is the one that I would get. So, I mean, I have pretty much all of my DDR5. Well, that's not true. I do have Corsair. I do have Corsair DDR5 as well. What I can tell you guys is almost all of my experience with DDR5 has been with GSkill, and I haven't had any issues with any of the sticks being defective. I'm not saying that you can't once in a while end up with a bad stick of RAM, but all of my experience so far with either Trident Z5 or Flare X5 or Ripjaws 5, all of it's been stable. I've been able to run at all of the XMP or Expo rated speeds without any problems. RK agrees with me about GSkill. Yeah, GSkill's pretty solid because they typically get the better binned memory kits from Hynix. So the best example I can give you is this kit right here. Think about it. I challenge you, try to show me another 8,000 megahertz kit that is rated to run at that speed at 1.35 volts. This RAM runs at 8,000 on 1.35 volts. I challenge you to find another set of RAM that can do 8,000 at 1.35. Oh, Danny, sorry about that. What was your comment? Oh, is 3600 megahertz DDR4 for 40? Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Just so you know, just to give you some perspective on DDR4 to DDR5 speed translation. So I don't know what the cast latency you're looking at on that DDR4 memory is, but what I will say is in general, 3600 DDR4 is roughly equivalent to 6000 megahertz DDR5. Oh, the first comment? Oh, you're wondering if Windows is running on the E-cores? Windows is running on any of the cores. It runs all the cores. All the cores are available to Windows unless you physically, or I guess you manually disable them in the BIOS. So yeah, it does use the E-cores. Was that the first question? Let me scroll up and see. I think that was. Yeah. But yeah, in general, 48, like if somebody wants a super, like if the best of the best RAM, this is probably it. This gives you 48 gigabytes, not some, basic 32 gigabyte amount. It gives you 48 gigabytes at 8,000 while also only running at 1.35 volts. If I use XMP on X670E, will I have to? No, it recognizes it just fine. You literally go into the BIOS and you will, like when you go to load the profile, they'll literally show you XMP profiles. It is exactly the same as AM4. So think about it like this. X570, X370, X470, all of those AMD chipsets for Zen 1, Zen 2, and Zen 3, all of them recognize XMP profiles for DDR4 just fine. It is exactly the same on AM5 with X670 and B650. They recognize XMP. It'll literally say XMP in the BIOS when you load the profile. In fact, I think I have a video. I have a build video that I did that shows that. I'm pretty sure I did show that in a video, and it was XMP on a gigabyte motherboard. On the X6 or the X670 Aorus Elite AX. And ASRock is the same way. I have a Steel Legend. It loaded the XMP profile for 6400 for 96 gigabytes, and it works totally fine. Now, one thing I will say, if you want to run RAM above 6000, it will take longer to train to that higher speed. It'll take significantly longer to train DDR5 in speeds greater than 6,000 compared to training a speed that's equal to or less than 6,000. This is because the automated process for the BIOS, it has a lot more intelligence, I guess. I don't know how else to put that, but it basically has way more intelligence and automation built into figuring out the right subtimings while it's trying to push the DDR frequency like way up there to 8,000. Even on AM4 you can DOCP or whatever. Yeah, well, okay, so that's an interesting point. So I hear a lot of DOCP and all this stuff. It shows that people are using a lot of ASUS terminology. So let's bring up Paint here, because that's an ASUS thing. Okay, so let's talk about AM4. So this includes X370, X470, and X570, and also all the, like, you know, the B350. Do we want to label all those as well? B350, B450, B550. All of these AM4 motherboards were DDR4 based AMD CPU chipsets, ranging from as old as 2017 all the way to 2022 with the launch of the 5800X3D. And then Zen 4 came out later last year, which was September of last year, and that's what basically brought in DDR5. So Asus developed their own XMP equivalent terminology. Why am I spelling this wrong? Terminology for AMD CPUs. This was called DOCP. You'll oftentimes see it in the BIOS like this. This is dynamic overclocking. The C is the overclocking. Dynamic overclocking profile. The DOCP, this is an Asus term. Asus term. No one else uses this. So when you mention DOCP, technically, if you're referring to a MSI or an ASRock or a Gigabyte motherboard, it is politically incorrect to mention DOCP. Let me put it another way. If you ever open up a support ticket with Gigabyte, MSI, or ASRock, and you start talking about DOCP, they are going to have no idea. Well, they might know what you're talking about, but they're going to have to kind of like deflect that because that's not their thing. So MSI created something called AXMP. This is MSI's AMD translated XMP. That is an MSI term. So if you have an MSI motherboard, that's either X370, 470, basically a DDR4 AMD MSI motherboard, you will be familiar with AXMP. That is literally MSI translating XMP memory profiles into an AMD relatable equivalent. Would I see noticeable frame gains in games upgrading from that to that? Realistically, no, you wouldn't. That's the reason why it's not really worth it. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. We're going to talk about 8000 RAM later on, but I think that's a good discussion point. So keep in mind, DOCP means Asus. So anytime I hear somebody talk about DOCP, they see DOCP in their BIOS, I immediately know that they have an Asus motherboard. They don't even have to tell me what the motherboard is. I will automatically know that it's an Asus motherboard that I'm dealing with. Likewise, if somebody mentions AXMP, I know they're talking or they're working with an MSI motherboard. Now, Gigabyte, let's just say Gigabyte and ASRock don't use custom terms when dealing with AMD platforms. Hence, they simply use XMP. Gigabyte calls it memory triad. No, actually, that's an MSI thing. Oh, Gigabyte might have that, but actually MSI originated that. That has nothing to do with DOCP, XMP, or any of that stuff. That's basically just them attempting to do you know, their own. That's a BIOS function. That has nothing to do with memory profiles. What these things are, these are tables that basically preload XMP profiles, and depending on if these memory profiles are on the QVL list, that means that if you're talking about an ASUS motherboard, if it has a DOCP profile, it means that somebody, some engineer at ASUS, some BIOS engineer at ASUS, literally took that memory kit, that's an XMP memory kit, and they sat down and they translated the primary timings and the sub timings to something that would work on AMD without any issues. If there were issues, they would tweak and tune what the sub timing values, like the TRAW, the TFAW, the TREFI, or whatever, all those values, ASUS went and manually adjusted what they should be other than what the XMP default is, so that they would run with high reliability and stability on an AMD CPU. Likewise, MSI with the AXMP, they did the exact same thing. And now Gigabyte and ASRock, they don't have these terms. They don't use DOCP, that's an ASUS thing, and they don't use AXMP, that's an MSI thing. So what Gigabyte and ASRock do is they do the same exact testing that when they're developing their QVL qualified vendor list, but they just use the term XMP. They just keep it XMP. You want to load XMP? There you go. So if you load up a Gigabyte motherboard, or if you go into a Gigabyte BIOS, and you go into the BIOS and you have an XMP memory profile installed, when you go to add the profile, it will literally use the term XMP on an AMD motherboard. ASRock is the exact same way. I literally have multiple videos proving this. Okay, every motherboard does that. DOCP is just logo design ASUS. Yes, all of it is the same thing. At the end of the day, all of it does the exact same thing. All of them are translating the XMP memory profile into their BIOS, and if some of the timings are not going to work, like oftentimes one or two of those subtimings needs to be something other than what the XMP value is by default. So these DOCP, AXMP, etc., they all have a modified value so that it knows, hey, if this memory is loaded in the BIOS, if the XMP profile is loaded, we're going to change some of the values so that it runs with high stability. Support one Usmus Hydra and DRAM calculator. I mean, yeah, you could do that. But basically, that's what all this is. Okay, so now everything that we've talked about is for DDR4. This is all DDR4. We haven't talked about DDR5 yet. Now, DDR5 is mostly the same. There is something that I want to mention from way back. So, we need to talk about DDR3. DDR3. This is before Ryzen. So this is going to be AM3 and AM3 Plus. These sockets, AM3 and AM3 Plus. Now, in particular, we're going to skip AM3. We're just going to talk about AM3 Plus. So AM3 Plus consisted of what's largely known or infamously known as the bulldozer. So this is going to be the FX 8150, the FX 8350, etc. So these were like the higher end ones, but then there's all those other ones. There was the FX 6300, the FX what else? There was a FX 9590, which was a joke, and the FX 9370, I believe. So these were the AMD CPUs that predate Ryzen. So these are the DDR3. Now, the reason why I'm bringing these up, can you upload a video with Task Manager in idle with an Intel CPU? I've got one. Well, what do you mean idle? Like literally just doing nothing? So the reason why would I need to do that? What is your CPU in the PC right now? The CPU in the PC right now is in the video description. Actually, no, it's not. That's actually the other PC. This one. Or I guess, yeah, this is it. 7950X is in the CPU that we are streaming from right now. This is an AMD AM5 socket. 7950X with a Gigabyte Aorus Master. X670E. Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing this up, the reason I'm mentioning DDR3 is because during the time where AMD did not have Ryzen, they had the FX series, they were post Phenom and the star topology. They were using clustered multi-threading, or CMT, as opposed to simultaneous multi-threading, which is basically what Intel does with hyper-threading. So during this era, they developed their own version of XMP. A lot of people don't know this, but AMD developed AMP, or AMP. AMP. Developed AMP for DDR3 memory profiles. This AMP stands for AMD memory profiles. A lot of people don't know this. Guaranteed there's people in the chat that are like, wait, for real? AMD actually did this? Yes, they had their own XMP long ago, before the era of Ryzen and before the era of competitive CPUs from both AMD and Intel. So, I just want to bring this up because we're about to talk about DDR5. So I want everybody here watching to know that long ago, AMD had their own XMP equivalent on DDR3. Intel had XMP, and AMD had AMD memory profiles. They literally had that. I guess it wasn't plural. I guess it was AMD memory profile. So this is what they had. Now, fast forward to today with DDR5. So here we are with DDR5, AM5. Because this stuff was all AM4 back then on DDR4. So now, let me just underline that. As you guys know, because the original question, this now we've come full circle. The original question from Googly, Super Googly, asked, can I, or do I need to buy an Expo kit? Or I guess the original question was like, is there an 8,000 megahertz Expo memory kit? And the answer is no. Today, there's only an XMP. So, why was the question regarding Expo? Because there is some understanding that Expo is an AMD-developed protocol, or standard, I should say, for the DDR5 memory profile. So, Expo is literally the return of AMP. In fact, when I heard that AMD is coming out with Expo, I just kind of rolled my eyes thinking, why did they have to rename AMP? Because AMP, in my opinion, AMP sounded cooler than Expo. Now, you guys can debate on that, whether you think Expo is better than AMP. I think AMP is easier to remember. AMD memory profile, it's a very easy acronym. I don't know why AMD had to go and reinvent the branding name for their memory profile. But Expo basically stands for, I think it's extreme memory profile, or I think it's like extreme memory profiles or something like that for overclocking, or extended Extended memory. I don't know. Someone's going to have to Google it. See, that's the reason why AMP was a much better marketing term, because it's easier to remember what it stands for. It literally just means AMD memory profile. You know, so I don't know why I think it's extended. Someone can Google it for me. I think it's extended profiles for overclocking or something like that. I think that's what it stands for. You guys can check if this is correct. I think I'm having a hard time remembering what this stands for. I think it's extended profiles for overclocking. Yes, you can run 8,000, but that's M clock equals U clock, so 4,000, 2,000, but still yeah, we're going to talk about why this is 8,000 is actually the magic number. 8,000 is actually the ideal for AMD, whereas it's not really the ideal for Intel due to stability concerns. But yeah, we'll talk about that. So I think it stands for extended profiles for overclocking. But this is essentially the exact same thing as AMP from way back in the day. So basically, this is the rebirth of AMP with a new name. So when someone mentions, if somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I bought some memory to load, I need help loading the AMP profile, I immediately know they're talking about a really old PC that has DDR3 memory, because if they have an AMP profile, it's DDR3 memory. So what's interesting is when AMD rolled out Ryzen with AM4, they never had a memory standard for themselves. They literally just used Intel XMP all the time. And that's the reason why things like DOCP, which we just talked about earlier, DOCP, AXMP, and then Gigabyte and ASRock, call them lazy or whatever, they just simply use XMP on AMD. They don't rename it. They don't do anything. They just, that's it. So that's why these names came up, because AMD didn't have AMP during like AM4 days. They only got it back with Expo. Oh, Expo stands for Extended Profiles for Overclocking. Oh, I got it right. I got it right. Okay, apparently I have a really good memory. I didn't know if that was 100% right, but that's kind of what I guessed it was. Okay. You use a clean tiny Windows. Oh, like Discord doesn't matter? Wait, because if I am in idle, just P cores are working for the OS. That's a good question. Are you referring to Windows 11 or are you referring to Windows 10? Okay, so let's talk about the whole, like, why is 8,000 actually ideal for Ryzen? So why is 8,000 megahertz DDR5 ideal for Zen 4? I guess that is the question. This is the question of the day. 11. Okay, well then it'll depending on what you're doing, it'll actually use the E cores more intelligently. If you're using Windows 10, they don't really know. Excuse me, 8K DDR5 Zen 4. Are you kidding me? No, I'm not kidding. It can be done. Okay, so we're gonna say why this is ideal. Now, I'm not saying everybody should just go and try to run 8,000 on Zen 4, because this type of RAM is very expensive and you don't get a lot of density doing this. But why is it ideal? Well, let's explain why it's ideal. So I think most people that have watched some of my videos on Zen 4, AM5, aka the Ryzen 7000 series, are aware that when you're talking about memory, you have to be aware of 3 different parameters that surround how the memory performs. One of them is the memory clock, the M clock. Why is everything underlined? Hold on. So there's M clock. which is the memory clock. Then there is U clock, which stands for the Unified Memory Controller clock, or also known as the you can also think of this one as the Integrated Memory Controller. Okay. So, or the IMC. This can also be abbreviated as IMC clock. The third parameter, often neglected or not really talked about, is the F clock, which is the fabric clock. Just do that one lowercase because the others are lowercase. 8K can be done. Hold on. You're sure you mean like M clock at 2T? Don't think that Ryzen can handle it on float. Okay. Everything that I'm talking about assumes, well, okay, we'll get into that. So the gain is pretty much 0. So here's the thing. The gain is pretty much 0 in the real world. Yes, that's correct. But we need to understand, why is this still ideal? It's even though you don't get a real world noticeable uplift, it's still ideal for reasons that are largely unknown to the public. And we're gonna kind of show this here now. We're gonna reveal all the secrets. The motherboard needs a high-end IMC. The motherboard doesn't have an IMC. The IMC is on the CPU. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the motherboard. When it comes to the motherboard is more about what does it actually let you set in the BIOS, and how are the wire traces done in terms of signal integrity to allow you to achieve the highest stable clocks possible. That is what the motherboard's responsible for. The motherboard doesn't have anything to do with the IMC. The IMC is actually on the CPU itself. Okay, so now that we've established these three parameters, we can now explain why 8,000. Like, what's the point of 8,000? Well, it turns out that ideally you want M clock, U clock, and F clock to all be equal. This is the ideal, but this is not the reality. This is not the reality. Why is it ideal to have all three of them run at the same speed? Because what it means is if all of them run in synchronized, or they're all synchronized together, it means that any sort of data or any sort of instruction, I should say, that needs to be completed, whether it's a load, a store, a jump, a JAL, etc. We're talking about assembly code terms here, but I'm just saying, like loading into memory, reading from memory, writing to memory, etc. All these operations that the CPU does when interacting with the memory, if all of these are in sync, then you would think that it all runs very smoothly. Okay? So one thing to keep in mind, that the F clock typically runs at 2 gigahertz. This is the typical speed for the fabric clock, and you can't really change this much. You can go a little bit higher. You can add, like 133 megahertz or 166 megahertz or so at the high end, like if you're lucky. But typically, this runs around 2 gigahertz or 2000 megahertz, and you can't really deviate too much from this number. That means that the F clock is almost like a static value that doesn't change. So if we plug in to the equation 2000 megahertz for the F clock, we would ideally want the U clock to also equal 2000 megahertz. And if the M clock, if you want this equation to be the same, then that means the M clock ideally would be 2 gigahertz as well. Now, realistically, this isn't how it would run, right? So you're not going to run your memory clock at 2 gigahertz. Billzoid made this video that trashed his own video on this. I think I know what video you're talking about, but we're not really talking about overclocking. We'll get into the whole architecture here. Can you tell me what's the difference of FreeSync, bro? That is very, very off topic. that is a very random question. We can answer that question, but it's going to require me to like completely shift what we're talking about right now. So let's finish this first. So when you buy RAM that's rated at, say, 8,000 megahertz, or okay, let's use a different example. When you buy RAM at 6,000, let's say you get DDR5 6,000 gigahertz or 6,000 megahertz on the RAM. That means 6,000 mega transfers per second. So what does that actually mean, though? What is the actual memory clock for 6,000 megahertz RAM? Because the RAM itself is not actually running at 6,000 megahertz on that Expo or that XMP profile. It's actually running at half that speed. So when you buy, okay, let's just say 6,000 megahertz rated DDR5 is actually 3 gigahertz RAM speed, memory clock speed. Just so you guys know. If you buy RAM that is rated for 6,000 megahertz, it means that it runs at 3,000 megahertz, not 6,000 megahertz. Think about it like this. Do you really think that memory chips with nothing more than a heat spreader can run at 6 gigahertz, which is what a 13900KS can barely manage to boost to on a single core? You really think RAM can run at 6 gigahertz normally with nothing more than a heat spreader? Compared to a CPU that draws like, 250 to 300 watts. And it can manage to do, like 6 gigahertz briefly on 1 or 2 cores. So 6,000 is basically 3 gigahertz. 3 gigahertz is 6,000 megatransfers. Why is that? Why is it half? A lot of people ask, well, why is it half? It's in the name. DDR. Double data rate. So it means you take your actual speed, you double the speed, and it's DDR, and then you get the doubled speed. So if you want to know what your RAM actually runs at, you take the advertised speed on the box and you divide that in half. And that is your actual RAM speed. So 4,800 megahertz DDR5 is actually 2,400 megahertz. Okay, so now we can start plugging in some of these numbers to make sense of, here, let's just kind of remove these. Double data rate, yeah, that's 24 is usually, okay, so let's say I have 6,000 megahertz RAM. Let's do for 6,000 megahertz RAM, what is my mem clock, my M clock when I load my Expo profile? It's going to be 3,000 megahertz. So now 3,000 megahertz equal, Now, here's the part where a lot of people start talking about 1T, 2T. 1T, 2T is technically a different terminology that is typically used with DDR4, but you can use it somewhat loosely when referring to DDR5. It's actually not exactly the same, but your command rate is kind of like your uClock's ability to run at a certain speed. Now, command rate is different from the uClock ratio, so technically, I don't like to use the term 2T and 1T when referring to the uClock speed, because we're talking about command rate versus the actual frequency, which is not exactly the same thing. But what we can say here is that in general, there are two different settings. You can either make the uClock run equal to the memclock, or you can make it run at half the speed of the memclock. So if we do uClock equals memclock, that means we want to do 3000 megahertz. Now, what happens here is now this is no longer equal. Now, the memory controller, which is the uClock, and the memory itself, which is the DDR5, which is the mclock, they are running in sync with each other, but the fabric is not running in sync with them. Now it is running asynchronously from the other two. It is decoupled from that magic 1:1:1 ratio. The ring clock doesn't apply. We're not talking about, there is no ring clock. You're talking about a completely different CPU architecture that doesn't exist on this. Okay, what are your primaries currently on your RAM? It's basically the RAM profile that I showed you guys. It's like 32 something something something. It's basically in that memory kit that we looked at earlier, the 96 gigabyte kit. So look, so you've got a 1:1 ratio, but look, we have a mismatch. We have 3 gigahertz and 2 gigahertz sending data across that bus. So think about that. Now we have a mismatch. So what happens here is inside the CPU, you have the memory controller. Oh, am I talking too loud? I can lower the volume. This makes your ears bleed. Okay. The uClock and the fabric clock are mismatched in this scenario where we're running 6000 megahertz RAM. So what does that mean? That means that it's running asynchronously. And how does the CPU handle an asynchronous configuration like this? Well, what does it have to do? It has to buffer on the side where it's running slower. Or actually, no, I take that back. It has to buffer on the side where it's running faster. Yes, it buffers on the side where it's faster. So on the uClock side, facing to the fabric, it has to run at it basically has to buffer the data operations in order to keep things running smoothly without errors cropping up. So you have buffering happening inside the CPU to account for the mismatched speed. Okay? So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something that has to happen because the fabric is running at roughly 2 gigahertz and it can't go above 2 gigahertz. So now this brings us to the 8000 example. So now let's use the case where we're running 8000 megahertz RAM. And this is going to answer the question of why 8000 is ideal, but it's not really necessary in reality. So the reason why is because when you are running at 8,000. Your memory clock is running at 4,000 megahertz. Because remember I said, if you want to know how fast your RAM is actually running, take the rated speed on the profile that you've set and you divide that in half. So 8,000 megahertz RAM means 4 gigahertz DDR5. So that's your mem clock. But now the U clock is in a Gear 1 mode, and I haven't explained what Gear 1 is, but basically in a 1-to-1 ratio, the UMC, or the Unified Memory Controller, would have to run at 4 gigahertz. Now, realistically, it is not designed to do this. The maximum stable clock that most U clocks can achieve on a Zen 4 CPU is around 3 gigahertz. You can probably go to 3100 or 3200, but that's pretty much going to be the limit in terms of what you can achieve for 24/7 stable operation on Zen 4. It is a limit of the silicon, because remember, we're not talking about the cores, we're talking about what's known as the uncore, the portion of the CPU that is not responsible for very high frequency operation. So the maximum it can do is typically 3 gigahertz, and not much more beyond 3 gigahertz. Likewise, the fabric clock maxes out around 2 gigahertz. So what happens is we run a divider. We run in the M clock equals, or I guess the U clock, I should say, equals half mem clock. So what that means is this will run at 2 gigahertz. But look at this. The fabric clock is still running at 2 gigahertz. So what has this done, or what has this achieved? This has basically removed the buffering that had to happen between the fabric and the memory controller, because these two at 8,000 speed, now the U clock equals the F clock. Now these two are actually synchronized with each other, which means there is no longer any buffering of data on the U clock waiting to go to the fabric to then go to the cores. Because the way that the CPU is designed, you have the cores over here. You've got cores that are running at, up to 5.8 gigahertz on a 7950X, for example, or a 7700X. It's going to be a little bit slower if you're on an X3D CPU in terms of the maximum core clock. But then over here, you have it going to the fabric. So this is the fabric, which is basically F clock. Then over here, you have the memory. So over here, you have the Unified Memory Controller, or the UMC. This is the memory controller. This is your U clock. And then that goes out to memory and back from memory. So think about it like this. Think of the data flow such that the cores go to the fabric goes to the memory controller goes to memory. So out here, I should actually label this, you've got DDR5 out here. This is your mem clock. You got this. So you have, and then the return path is basically back through. Like so. So this portion of the CPU, right here in the middle, this is the I/O die. So on a Ryzen CPU, on an AM5 CPU, if we take the CPU and we look at it, if we were to delid the CPU, what we would see is there's one square here in the middle, or kind of in the middle, and then there are two or one, depending on your CPU. Now in this example, I'm referring to a 7950X or a 7950X3D because that is what I personally have. That is literally the CPU that I'm using right now, is the CPU that we are detailing here on the screen. So you've got these two CCDs, these are your cores. But what I want to illustrate for the audience here is that the F clock and the U clock exist in this IO die in the middle. And the memory is outside of this. So meaning the wire traces from here to here is much greater in distance than from here to here in the middle. So ideally, if F clock equals U clock, you have no buffering happening in your IO die. So if both of them are running at 2 gigahertz, in theory, you would expect, better performance because you have no buffering of the data. Everything is flowing smoothly like water. At 8K speed, your latency is almost destroyed. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because we're not really talking too much about the latency. We're talking about the synchronization in the clocks between the fabric and the memory controller, because this is something that 8,000 megahertz allows you to achieve on this CPU. But 8K, 4K DDR4, but it's mem equals U 2T. That's 2T on the. You mean 2 gigahertz on the. Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. Okay. So that is the reason why, in theoretically, 8,000 is the more ideal speed, or the ideal memory speed for Zen 4, because it allows your F clock and your U clock to be in sync with each other. Now, in reality, it doesn't really translate into significant gains. And a lot of that has to deal with the fact that when you're running the DDR at 8,000, as Dabbing Kiwi just said, your latency gets destroyed. Yes, because you're having to run much looser timings on your memory overall. Your cache latency, everything, all the subtimings are far looser than they would be at a lower speed. So that's why the latency is significantly worse. But in general, when you're running at 8,000, when you're running your F clock and your U clock synchronized with each other, you don't have any kind of buffering bottleneck between these two happening here. So that's kind of the answer to that. That's the reason why 8,000 megahertz on the RAM is actually ideal, but it is so expensive and it doesn't translate into any significant real-world gains, which is why it's largely overlooked. Okay. So now you guys know why this RAM speed it's an interesting talking point at best when it comes to talking about Ryzen CPUs, because the whole thing with the F clock and the U clock, it's no longer mismatched. Okay, so let's move on. I don't want to spend any more time talking about this. It's an interesting topic. I wasn't expecting to talk this in depth about the memory architecture and the different parameters here for overclocking RAM, or just how the RAM is structured in general, or how the memory controller and the fabric clock actually interact with each other. So that is more on the CPU architecture side. We'll do a lot more discussion on the CPU. So for those that are interested in DDR5, Zen 4, Zen 5, particular Zen 5, because it is coming next year, we will do a lot more in-depth look at DDR5 8000 once Zen 5 comes out. Because Zen 5, my expectation with Zen 5 is that the memory controller and maybe the fabric will be changed or at least updated in a way that some of these constraints or these platform limitations that we have seen will either be removed altogether or heavily modified or improved in such a way where, you know, the name of the game changes. Because if you guys compare Zen 4 to Zen 3 and the architectures before Zen 3, it's different, right? Like now the F clock runs consistently at 2 gigahertz. On Zen 3, that was not the case. Typically, it maxed out around 1800 to 1900 if you were lucky. But that's the reason why 3600 megahertz was kind of the magic number on DDR4, because 3600 megahertz, you know, divided in half, that's your 1800 F clock speed, which then 1800 would equal your U clock, and then your F clock is running at 1800. So you're basically, like I said earlier here, you're running them in a 1-to-1 ratio with the older Zen 3. So that's the reason why 8000 is the magic number, because it returns the behavior to the same way it worked on Zen 3. Okay, so which upgrade is the better? Samsung 980 Pro to T700 or 6000 to 8000? Huh. Oh man, that's a funny question, because in reality, neither one of them is going to result in any noticeable real-world difference, to be honest. Now, I personally have not tested 8000 megahertz RAM. I will probably at some point, maybe next year, when Zen 5 comes out, I will revisit 8000 megahertz RAM. But I can tell you from personal experience with a Corsair 2 terabyte T700, you know, I've got one in the system right now. It's marginally better than the 980 Pro, but it is not, in terms of real-world day-to-day operation, you won't notice the difference, you know, going to a T700. T700 is more of like a checkbox objective, or, you know, it's kind of, the way I look at it, it's like achievement unlocked, you know, like I can checkbox the fact that I have a Gen 5 SSD. You know, that's basically what getting a Gen 5 SSD gives you. It's like, hey, I've got the world's fastest, at least as of right now, I've got the world's fastest M.2 drive. Does it actually make a difference in day-to-day life using the computer? No. So take that. It's going to be the same thing, I would assume, with the 8000 megahertz RAM. So at the end of the day, it's up to you if you want to get one, or if you want to get the 8000 megahertz RAM and clock it on Gear 2 mode or whatever. That's going to be up to you. But in terms of which is better, if I had to decide, well, I would tell you to get the T700, because that's actually what I did. I didn't buy the 8000 megahertz RAM. I bought one of these instead, and yeah, it's fast. I don't have to worry about my games loading slowly. So there's that. But real world operation within Windows, no, you're not going to notice a difference. Same thing with the RAM. Okay, so that was an interesting discussion. Let me see, was there any other article I wanted to talk about that I haven't talked about? Oh, I guess the other one was the RTX rumors. No, actually, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about this before we started talking about the memory. So the 4090 Ti, it might show up next year. It might not show up. It just kind of depends. I think NVIDIA is currently in a position where they don't need to sell the Ti variant in the consumer market. I feel like they can just get away with selling the 4090 as the highest end consumer GPU and then reserving the 4090 Ti for the professional market in the form of the RTX Ada 6000, or 6000 Ada as they call it. So yeah, that's gonna be that. That would be a very interesting GPU to see in person, though. That thing has it's a 4-finger GPU, and it has 3 fans, and the PCB is actually vertically mounted in parallel with the motherboard, which is very interesting. I've never seen a GPU cooler design like that before, but see, you can see the actual PCB for the GPU is supposed to sit in parallel with the motherboard. Even more of a house break. Yeah. I mean, look at that. Look at that. Look at how thick this is. Look, the 4090 is in the middle. The middle one is the 4090 cooler. The 3090 is the one on the left, for those that don't know. So we got 3090 on the left, we have 4090 in the middle, and we have the alleged 4090 Ti on the right. So it looks shorter. I'm surprised that it's shorter than the 4090, because the 4090 is already a little bit shorter than the 3090, but it's a little bit thicker. But this thing's a lot thicker. It's shorter and thicker, so yeah. That's a chunky GPU. Or that's a chunky cooler, I should say. First 2 are pavers. It's a straight up building block. Yeah, they just steamroll through. Yeah, the thing that concerns me, though, is the back of it. It doesn't look like there's a lot of space for air to get out of here. See, the thing that I noticed about this is if you look at the 4090 on the left, the 4090 has a lot more ventilation on the back here, whereas the 4090 Ti doesn't. That area is too small. I feel like they need to make this a larger area to exhaust heat, but they might be constrained based off of like the structural stability of it, because it is such a thick, heavy GPU. You know, if the back doesn't have enough support, it could end up bending or sagging. You know, it wouldn't look good. This is probably very, very heavy. So you see how they've got, they even have the display outs vertically mounted like that instead of like in a straight line on the bottom. So that's very interesting. How different it is from the lower end designs. It's interesting seeing 3090. So whoever has access to this, they don't have a 3090 Ti. The reason why I know this is a 3090 and not a 3090 Ti is because this power connector is the dead giveaway. If this was a 3090 Ti, it would have the same 12 volt high power connector, and it would be mounted in the same orientation as this connector is on the 4090. It would be literally like right here, and it would be kind of stacked vertically like how this is. Whereas the 3090 used the same connector that the 3080 and the 3080 Ti used. So what's interesting here is it looks like this prototype never said 4090 Ti, which means that this was probably a prototype cooler for the 4090, but it may have also been used for the fully enabled chip, which would be a 4090 Ti. So that's a interesting cooler. All right, so I think that's all that I had for the tech news. I think we can get into the gaming stuff. I wanted to kind of go through the Game Awards because some of my viewers, Some of my viewers throughout the year have talked about, like, oh, well, they've asked my opinion on which game do I think is going to get Game of the Year. Let's just kind of go through maybe some of these other categories, and then we'll eventually talk about Game of the Year, or what I think is going to be Game of the Year. Let's go through some of these here. So I was actually surprised on some of these. Best game direction. So I don't know how many people watching are avid gamers. I know a lot of people that watch my channel are tech enthusiasts like myself. But if you're going to test your hardware, you know, the best way to do it is with games. Like, let's be honest, games are a very good real world application to tell you how stable your memory overclock is, or your CPU undervolt, or your GPU undervolt, or your GPU overclock. So these games here, so for best game directions, this is going to be awarded for outstanding creative vision and innovation in game direction and design. So the nominees are Alan Wake 2. I'm surprised how quickly Alan Wake 2 got on a lot of these different awards. Baldur's Gate 3, Marvel Spider-Man 2, just like Alan Wake 2. That game literally came out like a few weeks ago. Super Mario Brothers Wonder, which I have not even heard of this game until I saw these categories. I wasn't even aware of Super Mario Brothers Wonder. Like, I don't even know when this game came out. Obviously, it was this year, but I don't know when. But The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, you know, that was, what, April, May? It was like April or May of this year, so it's like that one I know, but it's like the Mario one, I don't know. I don't know if that one should even be on this list. I'd never played it, so I wouldn't know. What do I think would be the best in terms of the creative vision? Probably Baldur's Gate 3, although I say that only because Baldur's Gate 2 is so old that it's been literally, what, like 2 decades from Baldur's Gate 2 to Baldur's Gate 3. And Alan Wake 2 is a good game. It looks good. A lot of people are calling it the new Crysis. It's super hard to run, but the visuals do deliver. But I don't know. Like, is Alan Wake 2 the most creative in terms of the vision? I tend to disagree. I'm not saying that Alan Wake 2 is generic. It's interesting. It's basically a thriller. It's a horror game. But I don't really know if I'd call Alan Wake 2 the most outstanding in terms of creative vision. It's got good visuals. It has a creepy atmosphere. But other than that, I don't really, like, is it really the most innovative? I don't think so. So I probably would say Baldur's Gate 3. Spider-Man 2, same thing as Alan Wake 2. Like, it's, you know, it's a good game. It's an action game. It's a PlayStation 5 exclusive. It shows off how good a game can be optimized for the PlayStation 5. I've heard people say that it's really short. Is it the most innovating game? No, I don't think so. Mario Brothers Wonder. Isn't this basically Mario Brothers just for the Switch? See, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this being on here. And then Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom, again, like, what did Tears of the Kingdom do that is so significantly better than, you know, the previous Zelda game from, like, a few years ago? See, I don't understand, like, why that one's on the list either. It's a scam. The Mario got nominated for Game of the Year while Final Fantasy 16 does it. Yeah, no. Okay, we will get to that. We're not talking about Game of the Year yet. But hold that thought, because I have a lot to say about the Game of the Year nominees. But we're going through the list. We're going to eventually get to Game of the Year. But this is Best Game Direction. Out of all 5 of these, I would probably say Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3, it's either going to come down to Baldur's Gate 3 or The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Let's be honest, in terms of innovation and what you can do, like how free you are to do things, try to break the game and do all kinds of stuff, Baldur's Gate 3 and Legend of Zelda, hands down, it's going to be between these 2 games. Alan Wake 2, no. Mario, definitely no. Spider-Man, no. It's not really the most innovative thing, right? So, no, it's going to be one of these two. All right, let's look at the next category. Best narrative. So which of these games had the best story? The one that made you cry, or like it told a very emotional story. It was very moving, that kind of thing. You got very into the game. You wanted to go in depth and understand the lore. You understand the story, all the characters, all the different subplots, etc. Maybe the side quests. So this one, looking at this list, Phantom Liberty it's kind of weird seeing Cyberpunk 2077 on this list. I'm not saying Cyberpunk shouldn't be on the list, but the reality is Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty is technically not a new game. So it's kind of like a massive DLC patch to the game, to the original game. So it's almost like it's an expansion at best. So it's very hard for me to come to terms with the fact that Cyberpunk 2077 is on this list, because when I think about all the other games that have come out this year that are novel games, original games that are not like a DLC update or an expansion or a patch, a major patch that fixes things, because that's essentially what Phantom Liberty is. So I don't agree with Phantom Liberty for best narrative. It's good. It has a good story, it has good lore. I mean, that's debatable, but I don't think this game deserves to win this award. Best narrative, it's going to come down to either Alan Wake, Baldur's Gate 3, or Final Fantasy 16. I don't think Spider-Man 2's narrative is that outstanding. Like, it's good, but it's not like so good that you are so, enthralled with the game world and all the lore and all the Spider-Man villains and all that stuff. I don't know why this is on the list. Like, honestly, there are so many other games that came out earlier this year that had a more interesting narrative than Spider-Man 2. So I don't know who made this list. It's a bizarre list because there's only like 3 games on this list that actually should be here. But I'd have to give this one to Final Fantasy 16. Baldur's Gate 3 has a very good story. It's a very long game. You can get lost in the game world. There's a lot of different choices to make that ultimately affect how your playthrough will go. But I got to give the win to Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16, the story, it's original. It's not a sequel. So this is the best one. It is literally one of the top selling gifts for children these days, if one can afford it. Oh, you mean the Switch? The Switch is so casual. Yeah, but who's making these lists, man? Like, I don't understand how is it that the same 3 games are showing up on, like, multiple awards? All right, here's another one. Okay, best art direction. This is an interesting one. So, again, Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 is on best art direction. So this one basically means which game has the most outstanding creative and technical achievement in artistic design and animation. So it's not going to be Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 has very good graphics. But having very good graphics doesn't mean that your game has the best creative artistic design. So think about how games that were very high, like in terms of technical depth. Like, think about Cyberpunk 2077 when it first came out back in 2020. Think about how that game was very hard to run, how it kind of pushed the industry forward in terms of visuals. But is that really best artistic design? I don't think so. I would say that the best artistic design, I think it would go to a game that has a iconic look a genre-defining look, a console generational look that 5 years from now, when you look back at that game, you're like, it's instantly recognizable. And you instantly know kind of what era, what console generation that game was from, just because of the way the way the game's graphics look, as well as the overall art direction. So some of the games that should have best art direction would be like Final Fantasy games, or like the Zelda games. Think about it like this: every time historically when a Final Fantasy game comes out, they always have an iconic genre-defining look for that generation when they come out. Think about Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X defined how games should look on the PlayStation 2 for that entire console's lifecycle. Likewise, Final Fantasy 13, regardless of what your opinion of Final Fantasy 13 is, Final Fantasy 13 set the bar really high for how games should look on a PlayStation 3 and an Xbox 360. So that's what I mean. Final Fantasy 15, it raised the bar in visuals for the PlayStation 4 generation. So Final Fantasy 16 is not on this list, and I can kind of understand why, because Final Fantasy 16 doesn't really stand out in terms of generational kind of graphical fidelity and art direction and animation design and all these sort of things. There are better games than Final Fantasy 16. So I am okay with this list. One game that I'm surprised is not on this list, though, is Hogwarts Legacy. The fact that Hogwarts Legacy is not on this list is surprising, because when that game came out, though it didn't have the best looking graphics, its visuals are in line with games of this time frame, games of this generation. And when I say generation, I'm referring to the console generation. I feel like Hogwarts Legacy, if somebody looks at Hogwarts Legacy 5 years from now, even 10 years from now, they can be like, oh yeah, that looks like a PlayStation 5 game. You know, like, it looks like it's a game from that era. So I'm surprised that that game is not on this list. Alan Wake 2 does have very good visuals, but I don't think it's going to be... to me, Alan Wake 2 is not... It's not the best game in terms of the artistic direction. Like, I feel like it's good, but it's not outstanding, where it's like, it's the one that should be recognizable 10 years from now when someone looks back at these games. So I would say that it's not going to be the Nintendo games. So Mario, no. Zelda, no. The Zelda game does look very iconic, but, you know, it doesn't really look that different from the previous Zelda game. So in my mind, the only choices are going to be Hi-Fi Rush and Lies of P. And when it comes down to it, in terms of 2023 and how games should look, I'm going to have to give the award to Lies of P. Because Lies of P, if you go and look at Lies of P next to any other, like, Souls-like or games from, like, 5 years ago, like, compare Lies of P's visuals to Bloodborne, to Dark Souls 3, you know, those type of games, The Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, those type of games. Lies of P looks significantly better than those games, and it's kind of in line with sort of the contemporary art direction for games in this era, games of this generation. So I kind of think Lies of P is the winner here. Controversy doesn't... Wait, what? Controversy? What are we talking about? I don't understand how Hogwarts Legacy isn't even on any of the categories. Yeah, there's some people that are saying that. I don't know how true that is in terms of, like, why Hogwarts Legacy wasn't included on anything. The other game that wasn't included on anything was Lords of the Fallen, which was actually surprising because I thought that game was pretty good, and it was relatively recent. I personally think that Lords of the Fallen was the best, like, Elden Ring sort of game that came out this year. So I'm surprised that that game didn't get nominated for anything either. And that game didn't have any controversy like Hogwarts. So that's, I don't know, that's weird. I mean, Lies of P made it, and I think this game should win compared to the others. If I had to narrow it down to like a runner-up, it's probably going to be Alan Wake 2. But I think when you look back, if you think back like 5 years from now, and you look at Alan Wake 2 and Lies of P, I think the art direction with Lies of P is going to have a more long-term, kind of an iconic, we'll call it a classic look for games that were made in this time. Like in terms of how the animations work, the fact that it's kind of UE4 at its best, because we had a lot of UE5 games come out that all ran like garbage, and then Lies of P is on UE4 and it runs very well and it looks very good. So I kind of think this one's the one that wins. Call it like a swan song for UE4, because we're starting to see UE5 games come out. So UE4 is slowly going to get phased out, but this is like a really rock solid UE4 game. All right, best score in music. This one is very easy for me personally. This one is Final Fantasy 16, like hands down. Baldur's Gate had some pretty good tracks, but I don't think Baldur's Gate 3, other than kind of the opening theme and some of the kind of ambient themes that play throughout Baldur's Gate, I don't really find the OST for Baldur's Gate that outstanding. It's good, but it's not like AAA awesome. So Alan Wake 2, I don't know, man. Like nothing in Alan Wake 2's soundtrack really stands out. Hi-Fi Rush had good music though. Like Hi-Fi Rush, I mean, the fact that this is like a rhythm game, so it's no surprise that this game is here. Legend of Zelda, I don't know. Like, it's not bad. It's got a good soundtrack. I would say Zelda and Baldur's Gate have pretty much, they're on par with each other in terms of soundtrack. And then Alan Wake is just, it's like almost as good as these two, or like just right behind them. So it's really between these two. It's either going to be Hi-Fi Rush or Final Fantasy 16. And ultimately, they always say music is subjective, but when you think about the differences in the musical variety that these games offer, there's a lot of variety in both of these games, although I will say that Hi-Fi Rush seems to be less varied than Final Fantasy, because this is it's a rhythm game, so its music is gonna kind of all fall into the same genre, whereas Final Fantasy 16 has a really good mix of like orchestral themes, but then it also has a lot of more interesting contemporary and modern kind of like new age type of music in some parts of the game, and by that I'm referring to like the Titan fight, Lost Titan, and some of those fights that come later in the game. The soundtrack really, like the fight against Typhon, for example, is very, very different. Some might say it's out of place because it's so different. It's almost like a techno type. It's like electronic. It's like EDM music almost in some parts. So 16 is very varied. So I would say that 16 is the best one. So, but yeah, I'm surprised that Alan Wake 2 is like on all these. Like, what? Did they forget about like all the other games that came out in the first half of the year? Super Googly with the super chat. You're surprised he gets nominated for Tears of the Kingdom. You're surprised? Most of the time there isn't even any. Well, I mean, that didn't stop some of those other games from 2023 from getting nominated. I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's let's just put it this way: the music that's in the Zelda game, it's good. But I get what you're saying. There's not that much music, so it's like, how does it really stand out in terms of being nominated for best score? If Cyberpunk 2077 could have gotten nominated for DLC, then Genshin should be on the list. Yeah, Nero. Nero actually brings up a really good point. You know, like, I don't know why. Yeah, I don't think Cyberpunk, other than like a DLC category, I don't think Cyberpunk should be on a lot of these lists because Cyberpunk is a game from 2020. It doesn't make any sense. You know, like they do a big graphical overhaul, add path tracing, and update some things and fix a lot of stuff. How can you call that a 2023 novel game? You know what I'm saying? That's bizarre. So yeah, I agree. Genshin got a full-on expansion back in August with Fontaine. And the story and the music, man, if they could include like ongoing games, Genshin should be on this list. Genshin's music, like the Fontaine soundtrack alone, is better than Alan Wake, Zelda, and Baldur's Gate. Like literally, those three games can't even compete with Genshin in terms of the music. So the only other competitors would be 16 and Hi-Fi Rush, and then that's where it's going to be very subjective in terms of what type of music you like. But yeah, I agree. Like I don't understand like how does Cyberpunk get on the list when it's just a DLC for 2023 and somehow it can be nominated for these type of awards. Yet other games that get expansions like Genshin doesn't even make it. So that's bizarre. Anyway, audio design. So this is gonna be like sound effects. So obviously, it's no surprise seeing what games made it to this list because typically the games with audio design that really stand out are always going to be the horror games, the thriller games, the scary games. So Alan Wake 2, Dead Space, and Resident Evil 4, this is pretty obvious. If I had to choose one, it's going to be between those three. It's not going to be Hi-Fi Rush. Hi-Fi Rush has good audio design, but I don't think it's like I'm not going to remember Hi-Fi Rush for the audio design. I will remember Hi-Fi Rush for the music, but not the audio. And Spider-Man 2, I don't know why Spider-Man 2 is here. Like, Spider-Man 2 has good audio, but, you know, like, why? There could be better choices than Spider-Man 2 that could be on this list. You know, like Lies of P. Lies of P has better audio design than Spider-Man 2, and yet it's not on this list. So I don't know how they decided this, but anyway, it's going to be between Alan Wake, Dead Space, and Resident Evil 4. Star Rail was this year, yeah. Yeah, and it got nominated for an award. We'll get to that later. So if I had to choose one of these three, this is a very tough choice, but I would probably choose Dead Space. What do you guys think? If anybody in the chat played all three of these games, I played a little bit of Dead Space. I did not play. Okay, I played the Resident Evil 4 demo. I have not played Resident Evil 4 yet, but I've played the demo, and it has very good audio design. But if I had to choose one, and I've watched a lot of footage of Alan Wake 2, I have not played Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 has exceptionally good sound as well, but if I had to choose one of these three, I would have to give it to Dead Space. Dead Space, personally, for me, I think they nailed it in terms of that creepy sci-fi atmosphere, that sense of isolation, that sense of dread. I think they did that really well. Alan Wake 2, that sense of dread is also there. Resident Evil 4 also as well, but the sound design of Resident Evil 4 never really made me feel it doesn't create this sense of hopelessness and isolation in the same way that Dead Space did. So I think Dead Space is the one that's probably best audio design for this year out of these choices. So that's the one that I would go with. But you guys tell me, like, what do you guys think? I think Dead Space should deserve to win this one. Okay, next category. Okay, this is gonna be really weird. So best performance. Now I don't know much about any of these actors except this guy. Elba's the only one that I'm familiar with. Ben Starr, I know that he was the voice of Clive, the main character in 16. This guy, Cameron, he's obviously the actor that played the role or the voice of Cal Kestis in Jedi Survivor. He looks a lot like the actual character, whereas these guys don't really look like their in-game characters. She doesn't look like her in-game character. She did a good job for Alan Wake 2. This guy, I forgot what the character's name was in Baldur's Gate 3. It's the dude with the white hair who's in all the pictures. He did really good too. But if I had to choose one out of this list, now this guy, Spider-Man 2, all of them did really good. But if I have to pick one out of this entire list, I got to give it to Ben Starr, because the highs and lows of the emotional kind of roller coaster that he had to display as a voice actor, I think he nailed it with the role of Clive. But everyone else on this list, they did really good. Like none of them did bad. It's just like if I have to pick one over all of them, I got to give it to Ben Starr for Clive, for the role of Clive. Cal Kestis, I mean, that character, I mean, not that different from the previous game, so I don't really know why he's here. I'm not saying that he did a bad job. I think that there could have been other choices that could have been just as good. But yeah, if I had to pick one out of all these, Ben Starr. All right, innovation in accessibility. This is an interesting award. Forza Motorsport is actually on this list, and I know there are some people in my Discord that are big fans of Forza Motorsport. I have not actually played Forza Motorsport, nor have I played Street Fighter 6 or Mortal Kombat 1 or Spider-Man 2. But I have seen a lot of gameplay of Spider-Man 2. I've seen a lot of reviews. I've seen reviews for Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. I don't know much about this award. I feel like if I were to vote on this award, I don't have enough experience in this category, so I probably would not vote personally, because I don't want to tip the scales in any. I don't want to just throw a vote in there as a BS vote that doesn't really it's like I don't know what I'm talking about, so it's like I shouldn't vote in this category. I would guess from what I have heard other people say though, that Street Fighter 6 has done a really good job in terms of accessibility. Same thing with Mortal Kombat. I don't know anything about accessibility for Forza or Hi-Fi Rush or Spider-Man or Diablo. I mean, Diablo, this is synonymous with keyboard and mouse for me, so I don't really know like what they would do for accessibility. But anyway, that's kind of what my thoughts are on this category. Okay, games for impact. I don't know what this award actually is for. I don't really recognize any of the games on this list, to be honest. We've got A Space for the Unbound, Chance of Sennaar, Goodbye Volcano High, Ticha, Terra Nil, and Venba. I don't know anything about any of these games. So again, I would not vote in this category because I don't know. I would be tipping the scale in an unfair manner because I don't know what I'm voting on. So I don't, for a thought-provoking game with a pro-social meaning or message, I don't know. I don't know enough about any of these games to be able to give a valid opinion on any of them. So, yeah. Unless anybody knows anything about these games, like, we're going to move on. Because I have never heard of any of these games. So, yeah. Okay, best ongoing. Okay. This one is going to be pretty easy for me. For anybody that knows anything about me, this might be a biased vote, but I already know what I'm going to choose. I'm going to let you guys give your opinion on best ongoing. Street Fighter should win in accessibility. Even I can get master rank. Okay. Okay, well, I mean, maybe that's why that was the one that I was thinking of. Like, if I had to choose one, it would probably be Street Fighter 6 for accessibility. I mean, I've heard a lot of things, whether it's good or bad, in terms of accessibility for Street Fighter 6. I've not really heard much about the others. So the best ongoing, this one for me is so easy. It's gonna be Genshin Impact. I recognize Fortnite being on here, but Fortnite is like, what really do they change besides seasonals? Like they add seasonals, they add skins for seasonals. But other than that, like it's nothing's really different, right? And then Final Fantasy 14, nothing really significant for this game. Final Fantasy 14 always has their content patches, typically every 3 to 4 months. So you can expect 3 to 4 patch updates in a year where there is no expansion. But from what I've heard, the game is pretty stale right now. And that's understandable because they delayed the expansion. So if you think about Final Fantasy's typical expansion release window, they usually do one every 2 years. And the last time they did an expansion, it was December of 2021. So it's almost been 2 years since Endwalker. And they're not going to do an expansion until next summer. That means there's going to be a lot of stale content and not a whole lot of interesting things happening in this game. So I don't think this game should win just because it's an off-season year and there are better choices on this list. Apex Legends definitely should be nominated, so this one makes sense because they keep adding new characters, just like Genshin Impact. And then Cyberpunk 2077, I don't even understand how this game is considered ongoing. Because, in my opinion, ongoing is typically a multiplayer game, or it's a live service game, let's put it that way. Yeah, a live service game that is constantly doing seasonals, events, FOMO things, new characters like what Apex Legends is doing, new skins like Fortnite, and then new characters like Genshin and new areas. So if I have to choose one of these, Cyberpunk shouldn't even be on here, to be honest. So it's between these 4, and Final Fantasy's kind of weak right now, so that one's going to be disqualified. So it's between Apex, Fortnite, and Genshin. And now we want to look at the quality of the... Yeah, Warframe should be on here. Why is this here? Yeah, Warframe could be on here. But realistically, looking at these 3, Fortnite is giving you the least in terms of the value of the ongoing content. So Fortnite, to me, would be 3rd place on this list. So that leaves Apex versus Genshin. And now what we do is we compare, what is the content that they're actually giving you. With Apex, occasionally they introduce new characters, and that's really good, and it's relatively simple to get the characters, so that's really nice. But other than that, it's pretty much the character being added to the game. So that compares directly with Genshin Impact. Genshin adds new characters as well. The only problem with Genshin, and this is where Apex Legends, I think, takes a spot above Genshin, is Genshin provides new characters via a gacha limited time banner. And that is a thing that, depending on who you talk to, that is a deal breaker for a lot of people. People will refuse to play this game just because the characters are on limited time banners. Meaning it's very hard for you, unless you're lucky or you play the game all the time, like I do, although I'm kind of quitting right now. Unless you play the game all the time and you have the Welkin, which is basically like having an MMO subscription, you're not really going to be able to get all the characters that you may or may not want. Versus Apex, where you can get the character if you want the character. It's relatively easy. It's not super expensive. Whereas with Genshin, it can potentially be very expensive and very cost prohibitive if you do not play all the time and you want a specific character. So Apex Legends definitely has a huge advantage over Genshin in that regard. However, the thing that I will say, and ultimately I think the reason why Genshin probably wins over Apex, is the fact that every year Genshin provides a massive content update in the form of an entirely new explorable nation within the game. So they do it every August of every year since the game has been out. So in 2021, they introduced Inazuma, which is like a Japanese themed nation. Then last year, they did Sumeru, which is basically like a mix between South Asian and Middle Eastern. So you have like deserts of Arabia mixed with jungles of, like rainforest type areas like in Southeast Asia. Think of like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and India in particular in terms of the way the architecture and things look. So that was last year. And then this year, they recently did one called Fontaine, which is based off of France and to a lesser extent Italy in terms of like Venice and Paris and those type of places. And the music is always kind of in line with sort of the similar visual look and feel of these nations that they add. So the fact that Genshin goes above and beyond in terms of the music that they actually compose, and not only do they do it for the expansion every year, they also do it for the limited time events, especially the summer events. And some of that music is very, very good. So I have to give the win to Genshin Impact for best ongoing. I know it's a gacha game, but if you overlook the fact that if you remove the gacha and you just look at what they're actually doing, they are putting out a lot of content at a breakneck pace. Regardless of what your opinion is on FOMO and gacha, I got to give the win to Genshin because the amount of effort that the development team puts into this game is immense. So yeah, this one barely edges out Apex Legends. All right, best community support. I don't know why Cyberpunk is on this list. I don't know why a single player game. I mean, I guess the devs are in open communication with the player base, but I don't understand how this is here. Destiny 2 is an interesting one. Destiny 2 is a game that everyone that I know that actually plays Destiny 2 always has something negative to say about this game. Like, I can't think of anyone I know that has played or plays Destiny 2 that has not criticized the game in some way. So because of that, I don't know why Destiny 2 is on this list. Because I hear so much negative complaints, and some of it is kind of like nitpicking, some of it is actually like serious or warranted, but I don't know why this game is on the list. Baldur's Gate 3, I don't really know why this game is considered outstanding community support. This game has been in early access for a long time. Maybe that's why it's here. I don't know. Final Fantasy XIV has excellent community support. The developers, the like Yoshi P is pretty famous, I think, as a producer because he has an open line of communication. He does these in the business world, they'd be called quarterly business reviews, but he's talking to the subscribers of the game, and they call them the live letters. So he provides updates on what the roadmap is, and that's very, very good. So I kind of think Final Fantasy XIV is definitely a contender for this reward, or this award. And then No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky, yeah, this one definitely makes more sense than Destiny 2 or Cyberpunk. But I don't know if No Man's Sky's community support can top Final Fantasy XIV's community support. It kind of depends on what we're grading it on, because like someone might say, "Oh, well, Yoshi P and the team is so good at communicating the roadmap," but what's not talked about, and I think that's included in here, is updates, patches, and also kind of like support on the back end. Like if you have an issue with your account logging in and that kind of thing for the game, in the case of like Destiny 2 or Final Fantasy, like what is that support like? What's the post-sale support model or the experience like? And I don't know much about No Man's Sky on that end. So nor do I know like how good they are in terms of competing with the way Yoshi P does the content updates and communication with the player base in Final Fantasy. So if I had to choose one, it's probably going to be Final Fantasy 14. Even though this game is pretty stale right now, and as far as I know, there's not a whole lot of people playing compared to where it was like a year or two ago, I still think this one has the best community support. Best independent game? For outstanding creative and technical achievement in a game made outside the traditional publisher system. Oh, this is indie. Probably Sea of Stars. I'll probably give this one a Sea of Stars. I heard some things about Viewfinder and Cocoon. I don't know much about Dave the Diver or Dredge. So unless anybody else has any experience with those, I can't really comment on them. But Sea of Stars, I would say, is probably the best indie game. No Man's Sky saves are local, so you can actually mod the game without infringing on other people. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's kind of like Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter World, you can do that. Yeah, but for an indie game, I'd probably give this one a Sea of Stars from Sabotage Studio. I don't know anything about these two, and I've heard some things about these, but they don't seem like the fact that I don't know as much about them compared to Sea of Stars means that Sea of Stars is probably the better one overall. I've heard this one. This one's been brought up in multiple discussions. So I personally have not played any of them, but from what I've heard, I think Sea of Stars is probably the best indie game. Okay, best debut indie game. Pizza Tower sounds interesting. Venba was on one of those other categories earlier, but I don't know. I don't know anything about it. Viewfinder and Cocoon show up again. I don't know. Maybe this one for me is probably gonna be between Viewfinder and Pizza Tower. I don't know anything about Venba, but it's gonna be one of these two. Probably Viewfinder. I don't know. This looks like one of those. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'll just go with Viewfinder for this one. Unless anybody else knows. I don't really play, as you can tell, I don't play a lot of indie games. Indie games typically don't push the GPU hard enough for me to spend too much time on them because I won't end up benchmarking them. So, yeah. But if the indie game is good enough where I hear about it, or if it's so good that I end up actually playing it, then that game automatically, in my mind, ends up being best indie game. Like, I can give you guys a good example. There was a game that came out a number of years ago. It was called Crypt of the Necromancer. That indie game was so good that I actually bought the game because it was just that good. You know, like it's not that often that happens. BattleBit, I don't know. I don't know. I don't keep up that much with the indie games. All right, here we go. Okay, here we go. Best mobile game. This one is so easy. This is the easiest one. This is so easy. Everybody here already knows what I'm going to say in terms of which one of these 5 is going to win. Like, hands down, 100%. No, 1,000%. I already know which one of these 5 is going to win versus all the others. This is such an easy choice. The other ones were not that easy. This one is the easiest choice. There's literally only one game on this list. Like, what you're looking at is an optical illusion. There's actually only one game here in front of you on this screen. There's literally only one game. You're looking at an optical illusion, guys. Like, seriously, there's literally only one game. There's one game. There's only one game, people. There's one game on this entire list. It's literally right here. Am I maxed out? Oh man, I gotta spend my stamina down. So yeah. So this is the game that's gonna win. Here, let me auto battle something because I'm maxed out. I need to do something real quick. We need some of this. Let's grab these. Here, just spam this. Physical, fire. Okay, whatever. Alright, well, this is the game that we're looking at. This is Honkai Star Rail, and it is definitely the best mobile game of the year. Like, hands down. Alright, let's go back to the game here, or the list. Alright, so that's going to be Honkai Star Rail. This game is available on the PlayStation 5. It's available on the PC. It's also available on mobile, obviously, and it runs very well. It's funny, I was kind of joking, when this game came out, it came out around the same time as Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Star Wars Jedi Survivor ran like garbage unless you had a really new PC. Like, unless you were on like Zen 4 or Intel's 12th gen or an X3D or 13th gen, like you had CPU bottlenecks all the time when Jedi Survivor came out at launch. But Star Rail came out. It had no significant issues. It had no bugs. It ran great on mobile. It ran great on PC. Now it's on PS5, and it ran great on the PS5 at launch. So yeah, this is the only choice. All right, anyway, that's enough of this one. If they give Tears of the Kingdom, if they give it to Tears of the Kingdom, you will stop watching Game Awards. There's a chance. Okay. All right, this one, best VR/AR. This was a tough choice, actually. Resident Evil Village is, depending on your tolerance for thriller type games, Resident Evil Village can be very terrifying to play in VR, but it can also be very fun to play in VR. So Resident Evil Village VR is actually really, really good. But Resident Evil Village was also, or Resident Evil 7 was also fully playable on PlayStation VR. Unfortunately, we still haven't gotten an update to be able to play that on PC. But yeah, Resident Evil is good in VR. Call of the Mountain, I have played Horizon Call of the Mountain. Because when I got my PlayStation 2, or what is it, PSVR 2, because I have the PSVR 2, Call of the Mountain is an exceptionally good VR game. Like, just from what I know, I have not played Synapse or Humanity, but these games look like they'd be good VR games. But what I can tell you, I have not played Resident Evil Village VR, but I have played Resident Evil 7 in VR on the PlayStation 4, and that game is very good in VR. It's really, really scary, but it's really, really good. And then Gran Turismo 7, the fact that this can be played in VR is also very interesting. I'm not a big fan of racing simulators. I used to play them in the past, but we're talking like PS3 era, so it's been a while. If I had to choose one, I'd probably give it to Horizon Call of the Mountain. Horizon Call of the Mountain is an exceptionally good VR game. It just goes to show that, like, when Sony puts out a VR headset, they can really deliver on at least one or two really good games. Like, I would say that Horizon Call of the Mountain is on par with Half-Life 2 Alyx in VR. Like, that's how good it is, just so you guys get an idea. I don't know if anybody watching is a VR person. I mean, I don't do too much VR, but yeah, Horizon Call of the Mountain's really, really good. So I'd give it to this one. Best action game. Okay, this is a really interesting list. I don't know why Hi-Fi Rush is here. I feel like they probably should have put Lies of P or Lords of the Fallen here. I don't really know why Hi-Fi Rush is here, because this is more of like a rhythm game. Armored Core 6 is very good. It's very hard. It's a very challenging game, just like every From Software game. Dead Island 2 is kind of boring, to be honest. Ghost Runner 2, I don't know much about. I never played it. And Remnant 2. Remnant 2 is a game that I'm actually considering getting because it's currently on Steam sale. I think until November, I think like next Tuesday or something. I might actually get Remnant 2 because I've heard a lot of good things about Remnant 2. And even though it's basically the way people describe Remnant 2 is it's Dark Souls with guns. And I'm not a first-person shooter person myself. Like, I prefer melee-based combat or combat that's in third-person view, like Dark Souls, for example. So Remnant 2, it primarily being a shooter, is not really a thing that I'm that interested in. But there's more variety to it from what I've heard, other than just playing like a shooter all the time. So I might actually get this game. But I'm very surprised that Lies of P and or Lords of the Fallen didn't make this list. My guess is Lords of the Fallen didn't make the list because it was riddled with technical issues like most UE5 games are at launch. But I'm surprised to see Hi-Fi Rush here instead of Lies of P. But if I had to vote for one, I'd probably give it to Armored Core 6. A lot of people say Remnant 2 is really, really good. I've heard that same opinion echoed so many times that I'm actually thinking of getting Remnant 2. And they just had a DLC patch. So I don't know. But if I had to pick one of these 5, it's probably going to be Armored Core 6. Armored Core 6 is you feel accomplished when you clear a level in this game, like with all From Software games. Best action adventure. Man, it's these same 2 games that are like and Zelda on like all the high category lists. I would probably say it's either going to be between The Legend of Zelda or Star Wars. See, this is a tough choice because some of these games have they're shooter-based combat, like Resident Evil and Alan Wake. And then others are more of like a melee hybrid action focus, like Star Wars, Zelda, and Spider-Man. And if I had to choose in terms of my preferred combat style in a video game, I prefer Spider-Man, Star Wars, and Zelda over Resident Evil and Alan Wake. So I would much prefer these 2 games not be here and they be on a different category. But then they have to go and put in puzzle solving in this genre or this category as well, which is even more confusing. I'd probably have to give the award to Legend of Zelda. I hate to say it because a lot of people think that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is basically the same old thing from the previous Zelda game. But I do think they do enough to mix it up where it does feel different and very varied in terms of the world exploration, the puzzle solving, the amount of freedom that you have. It's very open-ended. You can kind of go wherever you want and explore. It's very off the rails, so to speak. Whereas Resident Evil 4, Alan Wake, and Spider-Man are basically you're just following through a critical path campaign. And Jedi Survivor also is very similar, although you have a little bit more freedom in that game to explore different areas to a degree, but not in the same sort of sense that you get when you're playing Zelda. So I'd have to give this one to Zelda. That's just because there's not enough other choices. I really feel like they should have put like some other games besides Alan Wake and Resident Evil on this list. Like, I don't know. It's just, to me, I don't think of Alan Wake 2 as an action game. Let's put it that way. Nor do I consider Resident Evil 4 an action game. I consider these like thriller slash horror shooters or survival shooters. That's kind of what I would consider these, not action games. So, yeah. Okay, best RPG. This is one of my favorite categories, and I am very surprised at, well, not super surprised. I don't know why Lies of P is here. That one really doesn't make any sense to me. I don't consider Lies of P an RPG. Yes, there's a leveling system. Yes, it's a single-player adventure or story narrative, but it is very different than your typical RPG. It's definitely what I would consider an action game, despite the fact that there's a leveling system. It doesn't feel like an RPG, even though there's a leveling system. So I don't think this should be here. I think there's other choices that make more sense. So yeah, I really feel like instead of Lies of P, Hogwarts Legacy should have been on this list. Hogwarts Legacy should have been listed as one of the contenders for best RPG because that one feels like an RPG. It's a kind of a sandbox open world that you can explore, whereas Lies of P is a linear, level-based game design. You know, there's no world. You can't go off and do things. There are a few side quests, but it's all very handheld and spoon-fed. You go here, find this item, open up the map. Oh, look, here's a marker for the NPC you need to turn it in. It's very on rails. This should not be here. It's definitely good for other categories, but not best RPG. Final Fantasy 16 definitely is probably going to be my choice. Baldur's Gate 3, though, is also very, very good, but I don't know. Like, Baldur's Gate 3 is kind of what I consider quantity in terms of storytelling, whereas I feel like Final Fantasy is more quality storytelling. It's going to be between these two. It's nice to see Starfield nominated for an award, despite the fact that Starfield was one of the most hyped up games for the year, and then when it came out, it kind of fell flat. You know, it wasn't a complete disaster, but it had performance issues on PC. You know, a lot of people were complaining that it was unoptimized. But if you overlook all of the technical things that people were complaining about, Starfield just kind of felt very, very repetitive, very empty. The main quest was very generic and uninteresting compared to some of these other games that are on this list. But the side quests were pretty good. So I think where Starfield actually shines is in its side quest content, which is technically not a good look if you're trying to find the best RPG. The best RPG should have very good main scenario content and side quest content, not one or the other. And I feel like these other two games deliver on both fronts. Now, Baldur's Gate 3, it's an extremely long game, but it has a very convoluted story, and you can kind of get lost, which is not a bad thing, but it's hard to stay focused on a singular task in Baldur's Gate 3. And I feel like that's kind of where, if I have to choose best RPG, I gotta give it to Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16, the narrative was outstanding, the voice acting was excellent, the soundtrack was memorable, the boss encounters were very memorable, the icon battles You know, a lot of it was there was a lot of like emotional attachment to the characters during different arcs. There is a lot of that with Baldur's Gate 3 as well, but if I'm grading it on best RPG, Baldur's Gate 3 is more quantity, Final Fantasy is more quality. So, I guess in terms of game of the year, Baldur's Gate 3, because of all the quantity and the experience, yeah, I think that's kind of where it outshines Final Fantasy. But in terms of the things that we're grading it on for best RPG, the like the single player narrative, the progression, the feeling of improving your abilities, unlocking more skills. You know, you do that in Baldur's Gate 3, you do that in Final Fantasy, you get better weapons, you craft better weapons from the blacksmith, you do side quest content, you fight optional bosses. But Final Fantasy has all of that. It hits all the check boxes that I think defines best RPG. So I would give this one to Final Fantasy. If they give... Okay, yeah, that's the same comment. So anyway, that's that category. Best fighting game. Okay, this one for me, personally, is an easy choice. It's going to be Street Fighter 6. What's interesting about this is... globally, if you look at it globally, Viziers, I think that's how you say that YouTube name. Just subscribed. Welcome to the channel. I don't know if you're watching this live. If you are, if you have any questions on any of these categories or any of these games or any opinion, feel free to reach out in the chat. Globally, though, I do think Mortal Kombat 1 is the most popular game. In terms of, if you do like a Google Trends search, you will find that Mortal Kombat 1 is researched far more often than any of the other games on this list. That being said, I think Street Fighter 6, hands down, is a perfect 10 for a fighting game that has come out in 2023. Accessibility, we talked about it earlier. It's really good. They have definitely gone above and beyond to try to make Street Fighter 6 or the actual franchise appeal to a wider audience. I like how they've done the single player story. I think that's very innovative in an era where fighting games are very much lacking in that regard. And then the online component is handled very well. So I like how Street Fighter 6, how the lobby works. So I like everything about how this game is structured. So I definitely, Street Fighter 6 is the best fighter of the year. God of Rock is not terrible, but not anything like crazy outstanding. You know, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, that's kind of like, what's that one game that has like Scooby-Doo and Superman, and I forget what it's called, but that one is similar to this one. It's kind of like Smash Bros, but it doesn't really do anything outstanding. And then Pocket Bravery, same thing. Doesn't really do anything outstanding in terms of changing the model, trying to move the genre forward in a way that can draw in a larger audience. Nick Brawl being there is funny. Yeah, that's just because Tekken 8 didn't come out this year. That's the way I look at it. Ray is asking how Hogwarts Legacy didn't make any nominations. The Video Game Awards has no more legitimacy ever since Overwatch won Game of the Year. I didn't... What year was Overwatch? Wait, Overwatch actually won Game of the Year? I don't remember that. Wait, what? Overwatch actually won Game of the Year? I didn't know that. Anyway... Yeah, good point though, Ray, on the Hogwarts Legacy not being nominated. I really think that should have been a contender for best RPG. But yeah, I don't know. Best family game. Probably either. So this one is going to come down to personal opinion. I'm going to say this one's either going to be Super Mario Brothers Wonder or Pikmin 4 might actually be my choice. Pikmin 4. This game is a very fun game to play multiplayer. So I don't know. I'll probably go with this one. Mario is really good though. Like, it's always good. in terms of like a family. Like when it says family game, I think like not necessarily for kids, but like local multiplayer. Local multiplayer is what I think of when I think of best family game. So, you know, you're not playing online, you're not playing in a competitive arcade sort of environment. That would be like a fighting game. So this is more like a co-op, localized play. You could play it online, but I think of like a game that you can have split screen, you know, localized, co-op, that kind of thing. And I think Mario Brothers and Pikmin is really good. I don't know anything about Party Animals. I think I saw like a couple of videos on Disney Illusion Island, but I don't really think that it's better than Pikmin or Mario. Sonic Superstars is cool. I still kind of think that the other two that I mentioned are better though, so overall. But yeah, it's probably going to be Pikmin 4 or Mario Brothers. Best simulation or strategy game. This one is either going to come down... This is, again, personal preference because these games are so different from each other. I would have to say it's either going to be City Skylines 2 or Fire Emblem Engage. I'm not a big fan of Company of Heroes. Pikmin 4, I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's strategy, but I feel like this game... If I'm going to give this best family game, I'm not going to give this best strategy game. So, like, I feel like these games have more in-depth strategy than Pikmin 4. Although someone who plays it on the higher difficulty might argue otherwise. But no, I think Skylines... When I think of simulators, sim strategy games, I'm not thinking of Pikmin 4. Yeah, so... Fire Emblem or City Skylines 2. Don't know anything about this game. Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. I don't know anything about it. I know Steve from Gamers Nexus is a big fan of Skylines 2. This game is really hard to run. Like, Skylines 2 is extremely hard to run. It is very CPU heavy. Let's put it that way. You need some X3D V-Cache for this game, like, hands down. Just like Star Citizen. Alright, best sports racing game. I don't play a lot of these games. These are like, I think of these as the kind of like annual games. At least the sport, like EA, FC24, and F123. Yeah, Forza Motorsport might actually win. But if I have to vote, I'm going to vote for Hot Wheels Unleashed 2 Turbocharged. I was a big fan of Hot Wheels Unleashed when it came out a few years ago. I think it was back in 2021. So fast forward 2 years later, and we get Hot Wheels Unleashed 2. I have not played Unleashed 2, but from what I know from the first game, unless this game review bombed, I would vote for Hot Wheels. Why Gran Turismo's not here? Yeah, good question. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It was on like best VR. Gran Turismo 7 was on best VR game, but it's not on best racing game. Like, yeah, I don't know. What I don't understand is why they combine these two categories. In my opinion, best sports game should be its own category, and best racing game should be its own category. Because these two genres play so differently from one another, I don't understand why they combine them. Because if you're playing you're playing F123, right? Like, or no, not F123. If you're playing EA Sports FC24, like you're basically playing football / soccer, depending on where you are in the world. How can you compare this to Forza Motorsport or Formula 1? You know what I'm saying? Like, these are not even in the same... Like, why is this here? If they're going to put 4 arcade / simulating racer games, why is EA Sports FC24 here? This should be Gran Turismo 7. Clearly, the the group of people who put this list together, they have no idea what they're talking about. Best multiplayer. Okay, here's another one that's bizarre. Bizarre choices. Because I think Mario Brothers can be played online. It can also be played, I think, local split screen. Street Fighter 6. I don't know if Street Fighter has localized multiplayer. I think it does. I don't see why it wouldn't. But then it also has online. Diablo 4. I don't know why Diablo 4 is on best multiplayer. From what I heard, Diablo 4 is better as single player. Like, I don't know, man. Like, this is a really bizarre choices. Baldur's Gate 3, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, that's the only one that really makes sense to me. And then Party Animals, no. No. This is like no. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. I guess the winner is Baldur's Gate 3 by default because these, I don't know why these are here. Okay. Best adaptation. Okay, so this is for the actual show. This is for a video game that was turned into a actual live action or animated show or film. I can tell you right now, it's not gonna be Gran Turismo. It's not gonna be Gran Turismo. Probably The Last of Us. Yeah, Castlevania. Nope, not. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I didn't watch this, but yeah, I'll take your word for it, Nero. Yeah, so I'm saying it's not Gran Turismo, and you're saying it's not Castlevania, so we can cross these two out. So that leaves The Last of Us, which I actually think is I haven't seen the full series on HBO, but this is actually pretty good. And everyone that I have talked to multiple. Let's put it this way. When it comes to The Last of Us, the actual live action show, I have heard people who never played the video game tell me that the TV show is very good. Like, they liked the TV show a lot. But yet they never played the video game. They didn't even know the video game was a thing. And they really liked the TV show. So to me, that means a lot. Super Mario Brothers the movie, I mean, I guess this was okay. And Twisted Metal, probably like a B-rated film. I don't know. Like, I would say Last of Us. I vote The Last of Us on this one. Matt was saying something. You don't appreciate the distortions to the story ever since the first Castlevania adaptation. Matt's saying, I think we need a new category for the most unoptimized game. Yeah, well, yeah, they need to have all the bad category. Like, you know, like worst game of the year. Worst launch title. I don't know. Like, yeah, they need to have all those type of categories. Yeah, this one's going to be The Last of Us. Most anticipated game. Recognizing an announced game that has demonstratively illustrated potential to push the gaming medium forward. What is this? Oh, this is anticipated. Okay, I was gonna say, like, where is Alan Wake 2? Because when I hear most, like, the way it's described, it sounds like they're describing the next Crisis. You know, like, in terms of it's so hard to run, but it has really good visuals, etc. It's fully path traced. Like, and none of these are that. So, but they're talking about, you know, the most anticipated game of next year. So, looking at this list, hands down, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You're saying Tekken 8? Let's be honest, Tekken 8 is definitely on my list of one of the most anticipated games for next year. And I'm glad that it's coming out early. I don't have to wait too long. It's coming out in January, at the end of January. And Final Fantasy VII is coming out end of February. So it's not too long into next year to wait for those two games. And out of all 5 of these games, both Final Fantasy and Tekken are on my list, my personal list of anticipated games for 2024. Hades 2, Like a Dragon, and Star Wars Outlaw. I don't know anything about any of those 3 games, so obviously in my mind they're not most anticipated, but obviously they somehow managed to get a spot on the list. I mean, I've played some of the Yakuza games. I personally am not a huge fan of that genre or that franchise. Hades 2, I've heard a lot of things about the first Hades, but I never played it. And then I was always under the impression that this was like it's like an indie game that was actually really good. So I understand why this one's on here. And then Star Wars Outlaws, I don't know what this is. Like, is this an MMO? Is this a single player game? Is this like a Star Wars version of Starfield? Like, I don't know what this is. Is it multiplayer? Is it single player? I don't know anything about it. So, but I know a lot about these two. And let's be honest, Tekken 8, as good as that game is probably going to be, it's too niche. The target audience is too small for this to have any sort of impact going into next year. So I'm going to have to give it to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I mean, let's be honest. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there's so much hype that has been building up in the RPG world, in the RPG audience. It seems like every time I check, like, other news outlets for upcoming games in 2024, anytime I'm talking about RPGs, Final Fantasy VII is always brought up. Like, it's always Final Fantasy VII. So this one definitely is going to win. Like, I can't think of any way any of these other four could match this game in terms of the hype. Content Creator of the Year. Okay, I don't know any of these creators. Like, I don't know who Iron Mouse is. I assume this is a VTuber. I don't know anything about who this is. And then People Make Games. I don't know who that is. Quackity. No idea. Spreen. I mean, that rhymes with what? Spleen? I don't know. And then Sphere PK. I don't know who that is either. So I'm not going to vote on it because I don't know any of them. I don't want to distort the voting results in a negative way because my vote, it would just be like a throwaway vote that would give someone an unfair advantage. So, nope. Honestly, I don't know what these people do to get on here. Like, that's the thing. Like, if I haven't heard of them, then I don't know why they're here. Because if someone like me who doesn't really pay too much attention to the gaming content creator space, if I recognize a name on this list, then that's a big deal. But if I don't recognize the name on the list, then I don't really see how that individual could be Content Creator of the Year. And I don't recognize any of these people, so yeah, I don't think any of them should be here. But, you know, what do I know? Anyway, best esports game: Counter-Strike 2, Dota 2, League of Legends, PUBG Mobile. PUBG Mobile? Mobile? They specifically call out mobile. Valorant. Best esports game. Well, it's definitely not PUBG Mobile, I can tell you that. Valorant, it wouldn't even be PUBG, to be honest. Let's be honest here. League of Legends is the biggest one. The others, I mean, Dota 2 is also kind of big. Counter-Strike 2. Counter-Strike has a lot of people playing it on Steam, but in terms of how big it is from an esports standpoint, I don't think it's as big as the MOBA games. So I'm probably going to have to give this one to League of Legends, even though I don't play League of Legends anymore. I haven't played Counter-Strike 2, but I have played Counter-Strike Source and the original Counter-Strike 1.6. And it's a really fun game. It's easy to jump in. I get why so many people play it, but I don't think it's best esports game. And then Dota 2, it's more hardcore than League of Legends. League of Legends is more casual friendly. So I think League of Legends is the better one there. And then in terms of accessibility, PUBG Mobile, no, that game's trash. And then Valorant, it's not as good as Counter-Strike 2. I mean, it's a decent shooter, but no. It's like, no. Best esports athlete. Okay, let's see if I recognize any of these individuals. So I know who Faker is. And I'm someone who doesn't even play League anymore. I haven't played League regularly in years, but I know who this is. Ziwu, I don't know who you are. CSGO, but I don't really pay attention to that. And then Demon 1, no idea. I don't pay attention to Valorant competitive play. And then Hydra, no idea. Ruler, I don't know who you are. Imperial Hall, I don't know who you are. So I would give this one to Faker, because he's the only one I know. So I vote for Faker. These guys, sorry, don't know who any of you are. Okay, best esports team. Evil Geniuses. Evil Geniuses was the name. That's not the same. I guess they're using the name of the team that used to play League. Now they have that same team. Different people, obviously, playing Valorant. That's interesting. Fnatic, no. Gaiman Gladiators, I don't know who they are. JD Gaming, that's just another generic Korean team that plays League, and I've never heard of them. I guess they're one of the newer ones. Team Vitality, no idea. I'd probably give it to Evil Geniuses. Just because I don't know who any of the others are, and Evil Geniuses, even though I don't know who, like, I don't know how good they are at Valorant. Like, I don't know who they are when they're playing Valorant, but I know of this team from when they played League. And probably the people that played League are a completely different group of people, but I'm assuming because they're using the name, it's the same organization. It's the same, like, sponsored team. It's probably the same, like, coach organization, etc. So I'd probably give it to Evil Geniuses. Best esports coach. I don't know. Probably Potter, because she's the coach of Evil Geniuses, and I just voted for them for best esports team. I don't know who Zonic is. Gumba. Don't know who any of them are. So yeah, Christine Chi for Evil Geniuses for Valorant. Yep, that's the best coach, I guess. That's the only one I'm familiar with. All right, best esports event. All right, this is interesting. Obviously, Worlds is very, very popular. Probably the biggest one. Dota 2 Championships is really popular. Valorant has a lot of turnout. I don't know about Blast TV. I guess Blast.tv was the Counter-Strike tournament. Despite all of that, I gotta give it to Evo, man. I gotta support Evo. Evo has been around forever, it seems. And it's like the one thing that the fighting game community has going for them, whereas these other games that have literally millions of players worldwide compared to the fighting game genre, the fact that the fighting game community can still have a heavily sponsored event annually, that says a lot, because that community is so much smaller, and the fact that it can make this list, to me, has way more impact, and it means a lot more than, all the really big MOBA and first-person shooter championships. So I gotta give this one to Evo 2023. All right, that's the last category. So that brings us to the final one that I skipped, which is Game of the Year. So here we are at the very end. This is going to be the last topic for the stream. Game of the Year. The list is kind of in line with what I thought was going to be on here. I am surprised to see Super Mario Bros. Wonder. That's the only one on this list that I was surprised to see. It would have been nice to see Hogwarts Legacy nominated for something, at least like Best RPG, if not Game of the Year. But the more I thought about it, and this has nothing to do with the controversy surrounding Hogwarts Legacy prior to its release, but the more I think about Hogwarts Legacy and compare it to the other games that are on this list, it kind of falls short in the sense that its story is not as compelling as some of these other games. One might argue that Super Mario Brothers' story is not that compelling. So why is that here? Well, there's other aspects too, right? Like how fun is the game to play? Hogwarts Legacy is, I would say, kind of in the middle. It's fun to play, but I don't think it's that fun to play in a long play session, if that makes sense. And that's probably the reason why I still haven't finished it. If Hogwarts Legacy was really fun to play, I probably would have finished it back in March. So that's kind of why it's still one of the games that I need to finish by the end of the year. Now, that being said, it also doesn't have exceptional music. Its sound effects are okay, but they're not outstanding. It has a memorable look and feel and atmosphere, but it doesn't do anything beyond that. It doesn't take it to the next level. It has an interesting combat system that surprised me in terms of how good it was. But other than that, I mean, that's pretty much the extent of Hogwarts Legacy. Now, the other game that I'm surprised to not see on this list is Final Fantasy 16. I really was surprised to see that Super Mario Brothers Wonder is on the list instead of Final Fantasy 16, because I personally think that the Mario games are always good, but this game to me doesn't really, this is not a perfect 10. To me, the Mario game is no different from Final Fantasy. So I don't know why, if Mario's here, why is Final Fantasy not here? This, some people might say this list is too short. There should be more games on here. But then, it has to be no more than, I would say 7 is the max. So if you say 7, then there's nothing stopping them from adding 8 and 9, and then it's a really long list. So I get where they're coming from. I don't really know why Mario's here. And I also don't really know why Resident Evil 4 is here. Resident Evil 4 was a perfect 10. So I know that it was a perfect 10. But it is still a remake of a classic, which was already an exceptionally good game when that game debuted way back on the GameCube. A long time ago. So the fact that Resident Evil 2 Remake and 3 Remake never got nominated for Game of the Year, it's like, okay, why does Resident Evil 4 get to be nominated for Game of the Year? Well, maybe because it scored a perfect 10. But, it's kind of a niche game. I feel like Resident Evil 4 is more approachable for someone to play versus a game like Armored Core 6 or even Elden Ring for that matter. So I get why it can be on this list. Alan Wake 2 to the same degree as Resident Evil 4, but it is really weird to see two kind of psychological thriller games both on the list for Game of the Year, and yet we don't see Final Fantasy 16 on this list. So that is kind of bizarre. Although Baldur's Gate 3 did make it to the list, and it is an RPG, and it is a really good game, and ultimately, looking at this list, Zelda's here as expected, Baldur's Gate's here as expected, and then, Alan Wake is kind of a surprise, but I'm not really surprised the more I think about it. Resident Evil 4, I'm not really surprised. Mario, I am kind of surprised. And Spider-Man, I am also somewhat surprised. It seems like, from what I've observed over the years, there's always a Sony first-person game that makes it to the list. This year, it's Spider-Man 2. Last year, it was God of War Ragnarok. So, in fact, I think we had 2 last year. We had God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West. Both were Sony first-person games. So this year we got Spider-Man 2. And then last year, there's always a Nintendo game that also makes it to the list. So this year, we have two. We have one Sony game, which is Spider-Man, and we have two Nintendo games, which are Super Mario Bros. Wonder and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Last year, it was flipped. We had two Sony games, Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok, and then we had one Nintendo game, which was Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So now it's reversed. This year we have two Nintendo and one Sony. Last year was two Sony and one Nintendo. So that kind of clutters the list, depending on what your opinion is of the Sony first-person games or the Nintendo games. If you're someone who even plays the console games, then this kind of feels like fluff because, these are not on PC, at least not officially. So that kind of leaves these other three games. And I think where some people are probably going to be disappointed is, well, why is Resident Evil 4 here? Or why is Mario here? And that's where I think people who wanted to see either Hogwarts or Final Fantasy make the list, they're going to be a little bit disappointed. I personally would have liked to have seen Final Fantasy 16 on this list. Now, that being said, when that's all said and done, regardless of whether Final Fantasy is here or not, if I had to choose best game of 2023, I would choose Baldur's Gate 3. And that is not just me echoing the crowd. I have not finished Baldur's Gate 3, but I have played several hours of the first act. And what I can say is you have so much freedom to craft your playthrough in whatever way you want. There's a lot of character interaction. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of choices. There's a lot of exploration. It depends on if you like top-down viewpoint or not, but you can also play the game from third-person view as though it was Dark Souls. So that's really cool, and it has very good controller, like console controls and keyboard and mouse controls. So accessibility is really good. The sound design is excellent. The characters are well written. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of dialogue. There's just a lot of content. So, and the fact that you can play the game like classic D&D with up to 3 other players and play through the entire story as a group, I just got to give the win to Baldur's Gate 3. There's like no other way to spin this. It's basically Baldur's Gate 3. You guys let me know what you think. I mean, if these are the choices, even if Final Fantasy 16 was on here, I have to give the win to Baldur's Gate 3. It's just so much content, multiplayer, single player. The amount of just, you can tell that the developer Larian Studios put so much effort into this game. Regardless of what your opinion on the genre is, I personally am not a huge fan of CRPGs, personally. I don't play a lot of them. And that's why I haven't finished Baldur's Gate 3, because I'm not super into the genre, but I gotta give credit where credit is due. Even though I personally like Final Fantasy 16 more, and on top of that, I had a lot of fun with other games that didn't even make this list, like Lords of the Fallen, for example, and Hogwarts Legacy. I recognize that Baldur's Gate 3 is the better game. So it deserves to win. BG3 because it is acceptable. Yeah. See, there's not a whole lot. It's very hard to hate on Baldur's Gate 3. Because it's a quality game. When it came out, it was not riddled. It was one of the few, let's put it this way. It was one of the few Western design or Western studio games, or a game that was published by a Western studio, let's put it that way, that was not riddled with bugs, instability, technical issues, server-based issues, multiplayer, all this type of stuff that other games that have come out this year have experienced. BG3 came out and did not have any of these problems. It launched as though it was made by a competent team that playtested the game. Now, some people might argue, well, the game was in early access for a long time, so that's why they didn't have it. Yes, but the thing is, other games came out this year. Honkai Star Rail came out this year and did not have any problems. Armored Core 6 came out this year. It looks great. It had no problems. Lies of P. Excellent visuals. Excellent performance. No issues at launch. It had some balancing issues, some difficulty tweaks that they needed to do, but other than that, it ran fine. On PC, it ran really good on PlayStation 5 as well. And, yeah, can't complain. But if we look at some of the other games, Forspoken, performance problems. Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy had VRAM utilization problems at launch, but other than that, Hogwarts Legacy was relatively good. Jedi Survivor, CPU-bound issues at launch, and that are still not really that resolved. They are much improved, but really, not good at launch. Starfield. Starfield had all kinds of unexplainable performance issues on anything other than AMD GPUs. If you were on Intel GPUs, it ran like trash. If you were on NVIDIA GPUs, it was not like utilizing the GPU to its fullest capacity. So there was all kinds of weird things with Starfield. The fact there was no DLSS. FSR2 was there. It was on by default because the FSR upscaling was built into the presets, which was really bizarre. Stuff like that a lot of people complained about. The fact that a lot of the Western studio games launched in a cyberpunk-like state at launch was not very good, and a lot of people blame UE5, but UE5 was not on all these games. Starfield didn't use UE5. And it had issues. But the issues were, I kind of think, overstated. The game, for the most part, was okay. It was just kind of bland. It had so much hype going into it, and then it just kind of, deflated like a balloon. And then, what else was there? Lords of the Fallen. Lords of the Fallen went from being a game that was on my radar to a game that was, one of my most anticipated games of this year. And that game was riddled with stability issues. People had corrupted save files. People had crashing issues. NVIDIA had to update their driver 5 times within the first 2 weeks of the game being out because there were so many RTX 30 series owners that had all kinds of stability issues. They had DLSS 3. They even had FSR 3, but then they took it out. Only the preview sample had FSR 3. They did not make it available at launch. DLSS 3 was in at launch, then they took it away because there were so many weird stability problems. They brought it back with a Steam console command or override command to re-enable it, but then eventually I think it got put back in. Actually, no, it's still not in because I played the game on the 4090 the other day and it's still not in. So, stuff like that. And that's a UE5 game and it's a multiplayer game. Immortals of Avium. UE5 ran like garbage on pretty much every PC imaginable, save for the 4090 at 1080p resolution or some ridiculously low resolution. Stuff like that. There was a lot of games that launched with issues, and that's kind of what I'll remember 2023. When I look back at this year, a year from now, or 2 years from now, I'll think back, 2023. Yeah, that was the year that had Baldur's Gate 3 and a bunch of other games that were launched in a incompetent state. Yeah, that's pretty much 23. Oh, and Star Rail came out. That's how I'll remember this year when it comes to gaming. So anyway, that's probably going to be it for this stream. So again, my vote for Game of the Year is Baldur's Gate 3. It would have been nice to see Hogwarts Legacy nominated for something. Probably Best RPG. I would have liked to have seen Final Fantasy 16 on Game of the Year on the list, even though I wouldn't vote for it. But I think that it's a contender for Game of the Year. But yeah, it is what it is. So that's going to be it for this stream. Hope you guys found this one interesting. Next week is Threadripper. So I don't know if I'm going to actually obtain Threadripper. Obviously I'm not going to get any review samples. So if I have to buy one, I don't think I'm going to do it because the CPU and the motherboard is one thing. The problem that is probably going to be a deal breaker for me is having to buy the registered DDR5. So the RDIMM is a requirement for Threadripper, and that memory is insanely expensive. It's basically like having to buy DDR5 with the prices from last year. And I don't really feel like doing that. So I don't know if I'm going to have Threadripper at launch. I may eventually upgrade to Threadripper, but I don't know. The problem is, by the time ECC RAM becomes more affordable, I'll have probably moved on, and Zen 5 will probably be around the corner, and I'll probably just do that as a socket drop-in upgrade for my 7950X. So we'll see how that goes next year. So once again, guys, if you like this content, feel free to subscribe. If you like technology, especially PC hardware like GPUs, CPUs, motherboards, memory, etc., subscribe to the channel. We have a great community Discord that if you guys are doing a build and you need build advice or you want to ask me questions, you can do that during the stream. You can do that like in the Discord. And then we've got a lot of people that are very helpful in the community. So feel free to join that and subscribe to the channel. And that's going to be it for this one. I'll be back next week. I might actually be doing some stream. I might be doing some gameplay streams on YouTube next week, maybe this weekend. I might also try streaming on Twitch to see what a simulcast stream is like in 2023 with an AMD GPU. I need to finish Hogwarts Legacy. I know Met has been asking me about Hogwarts Legacy. I do want to finish that game, so I will probably revisit that game very soon. And I do want to do probably 1 or 2 more streams featuring Lords of the Fallen, particularly trying to unlock the secret ending, which is also known as the Umbral ending. So I might stream some of my playthrough, trying to rush through the game to get that ending. And then I'm probably going to be done with Lords of the Fallen for good, because the game's community is dying off like flies. Despite the fact that the game has really good co-op when it actually works. PvP is kind of broken. Like, I basically did a lot of invasions. I might do some PvP on stream and show you guys what it's like for me to play as the invader and basically, grief other players. But oftentimes what ends up happening is when I try to invade, either I get they disconnect so they don't have to fight me, or they, Alt F4 out of the game if they're gonna lose. So it's kind of it's annoying. And I totally understand where the guy or the girl who's getting invaded by me feels. So I accept if they want to disconnect, that's fine, whatever. Yeah, that's the reason why that game is pretty much dead. Like, the community is pretty much dead. And they still have, supposedly, they still have issues with people getting corrupted save files. Now, I personally, knock on wood, have never suffered a corrupted save file, but I have also never had the game crash. So, and I've been playing the game on AMD and NVIDIA. And NVIDIA, the game has compilation stutter problems within the first minute of loading in. And I don't know why they haven't fixed that, but that's still a problem. And that might be another reason why people are quitting the game in droves, because most people are playing on Nvidia. And if your game is stuttering like a slideshow for 45 seconds before you can actually play, that's not a good look. And it doesn't do it on AMD for some reason, but not a lot of people are playing it on AMD. So, and by AMD, I'm talking about Radeon, not Ryzen. Like I'm using it on Ryzen, and it works really good on Ryzen. So anyway, so that's what you guys can expect. Some live streams of gameplay, and if you guys want to ask about build advice or anything, we may do a stream looking at Black Friday deals from Micro Center and Newegg. That was a pretty popular stream I did last year. And we'll try to find the best deals for graphics cards and for other things that are PC related. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.